In Henan's bustling streets under a starlit sky, lanterns bathed everything in warm red, laughter bubbled through the night, and then every head snapped to a strange sight unfolding at the crowd's center. He sat and tore into his food as if there were no tomorrow, shoving bites down while hot tears streaked down his cheeks. A panicked onlooker leaned in and hissed, "Someone has to stop him!" A bystander's voice cracked, "Is he going to die from eating that much?" He tore into the hearty meal, stunned as tears betrayed him and slid down his cheeks. A bystander snorted, shook his head knowingly, and shot back that this had to be the newcomer's first time seeing him. He was famous across Henan. The newcomer blurted that the man must be famous for that striking face, but the seasoned local snorted and snapped, "A real merchant knows not to judge a soul by looks alone." He scoffed that the man still had much to learn, and, even if the newcomer wasn't from here, he couldn't have missed the staggering feat he'd pulled off, uniting every merchant union across all of Henan. The newcomer's jaw dropped. He repeated the words, astonished that one man had welded every merchant union into one. The local, utterly certain, confirmed it, and spoke the man's name and title. He was young Heir of the Sky Ocean Merchant Union, the grand merchant who welded every union into a single unstoppable banner. A voice erupted behind young Heir as a hand shot out, jabbing a finger straight at him. A voice spat that he gorged himself beyond reason. While ordinary people ate 3 meals a day, he devoured 3 days' worth in a single sitting. She lunged forward, clawing at his shirt in desperation, begging him to stop eating as her voice cracked with fear, while she warned that his gluttony would wreck his health. Young Heir whipped his tear-streaked face toward her, voice trembling as he pleaded that if he stopped eating, the memories of that nightmarish day would surge back and haunt him. Anguish clawing at her throat, she demanded, "Are you really going to keep living like this until it kills you?" Huai-an could only choke out her name, his voice ragged and shattered. "Yanhua!" Later that night they slipped out of town and sank side by side into a carriage. He shoved it aside with weary hands, confessing that all the gaudy jewels and glittering riches felt meaningless once he'd gorged himself on food and luxury. He confessed, his words a desperate bandage slapped over a wound that would never heal. He realized only the warmth of others could dull the raw ache of losing people. But every night the nightmare of that tragic day ripped through his sleep. Yonghua pinned him with a worried stare and whispered, "Young master." Huyen's lips curled into a small, almost bitter smile. She snapped that he'd been the head of the Sky Ocean Union for ages, yet she stubbornly clung to the old title instead of calling him head merchant. Yonghua's voice cut through the silence, iron steady, as she told him no amount of time would erase him from her heart as the Tianzong clan's master. Huayern's chest went heavy as he studied her face, and only then spotted the faint wrinkles beginning to show. He remembered her standing by his side, serving him even after he'd abandoned his clan and married into another family. She wasn't a servant to him, she was family. He knew that without her, he'd have perished long ago. Memories crashed into him like a tidal blast. The Tianzhuang clan, once flourishing, lay annihilated, its glory snuffed out. Huyern's memory flared with the contempt he'd once aimed at his family. And most of all, memory slammed him, the cruel words he'd spat as a youth. A statue would stand where he belonged, and if his father ever asked for him, they were to point to that stone. He renounced his clan without a backward glance, the eldest son of a martial arts family who should have had a different destiny. But he'd been bartered to the Sky Ocean Merchant Union in an arranged marriage, and he walked into it willingly. A few years later, the Dabysec struck, and Huern could only watch as flames devoured his clan. Only then did he realize that, in his memory, his love burned just as fiercely. His younger self rammed his forehead into the statue that had once sneered at his father's authority. He spoke with iron resolve, swearing he'd change from this moment, vowing to mend his marriage and burn off the excess weight that had held him back. He flashed a sheepish grin, scratched the back of his head, confessed he feared his wife's coldness, vowed he'd serve his family from now on, and told Yuanhua once more she was like family to him. Relief flooded Yuanhua's eyes as she opened her mouth to vow she'd stand by his side, but something cut her off mid-phrase. All hell broke loose when an old man's body tore through the carriage and smashed into her with brutal force, killing her instantly. The old man, bloodied and broken, crashed to his feet and blood spewed from his mouth as he rasped that his organs lay in tatters. The old man snatched the blade with his bare hand, halting its bite before it could slice into him, and the masked assailant's voice went ice cold as he reminded him he'd been warned there was no escape. Rage ripped from the old man as he bellowed, "How dare you betray me before I could finish!" Blades slammed into him again and again. A masked man sneered this marked the almighty demonic master's end and mocked him with a cold, "Farewell, dear master." The old man's voice exploded with fury as he spat curses and vowed vengeance on the blood demon castle. If he failed to grind them down and drink their blood, he would be unworthy of the name demonic master. His fury detonated into a crimson surge that hurled the masked men flying, while Heir lay injured. Panic ripped through him. He lurched forward, screaming her name. He unleashed a raw howl that split the night, cursing the merciless twist of fate. The old man, his life hanging by a thread, staggered away, each breath a battle. Ragged breaths rasped as he swallowed the truth. He needed a new body before his heart gave out. He swallowed hard and rasped. I must use the spirit possession technique. Doubt trembling through his voice. A cold voice cut through his despair. Wern, eyes wild with grief and fury, screamed at the old man, blaming him for dragging Manhwa into this mess, picking a fight here, and getting her killed. He roared for an answer, hands trembling as he yanked the old man by the collar, his voice cracking as he screamed that his family had just been taken from him. The old man's lips barely twitched as he warned him not to. Then in a blur he slammed his left hand into Heir's pressure point. The old man shambled toward him, his voice a gravelly mocking rasp as he snapped at Heir not to treat an injured old man so harshly. Heir's inner voice lashed out, cursing him. He'd known the old man was a martial artist, but fury had stripped him of control. The old man sank down beside him, and voice raw, confessed he'd been saving one last spirit possession. To snatch a young, talented body, and buy himself more time. With death moments away, he had no choice. Even a pig's body would do. He unleashed the technique, funneling 160 years of martial essence into his left hand, pure chi compressed to its absolute peak. He thrust his right hand forward and unleashed the ultimate essence of his soul. A violent red aura ripped into the sky, the shockwave buckling the ground. After a few moments, the aura snuffed out, leaving the old man a lifeless husk. Heir's body convulsed, shot upright, and shoved the corpse aside. His eyes ignited with a sinister light as he whispered, "I've succeeded." Then a twisted smile unfurled across his face. Suddenly his face crumpled and his body rebelled against him. Two voices clashed inside him. The old man's spirit snarled in frustration that Heir should already have been crushed beneath his immense chi and spiritual power. Heir's spirit exploded to life, refusing to bow. He swore he wouldn't die like this. He would survive, claw his way back and avenge his clan. The two spirits slammed into one another, sparks and shadows erupting as they fought to seize control. Heir felt his spirit start to splinter under the crushing strain, and the old man sneered that, while his will surprised everyone, it was doomed to fail. Heir let out a ragged gasp as his consciousness dimmed and slid into the void. Beyond the chaos inside, one of the masked men reappeared, closed in on the possessed body and curled his lips into a vicious sneer. Recognition hit him like a blow. The technique proved the demonic master's fearsome legend true, and the demons of the three heavens hadn't revered him for nothing. He thundered, "My parasitic life ends here," and launched himself forward. When consciousness slammed back, he found himself beneath a bright, sunlit sky and let out a ragged groan, clutching his head. He groaned that it felt like it was about to split, then painfully peeled his eyes open. He spun, taking in racks of jars and powdered herbs. This was an apothecary, and his throat scorched with thirst. Bitter, unmistakable medicine scorched his tongue as he lowered the cup. His gaze snapped to his hand, his eyes going wide as he stared at it for a long frozen beat before suddenly, the cup shattered. He stared at his hands, disbelief stabbing through him. She barreled into the room, jolted by the sudden crash, and shouted his name as the young master darted forward, asking if he was all right, panic ripping through him at the thought that something had broken. He shot to his feet, gripped her shoulders with urgent force, drilled his eyes into her face and barked, "Are you Manhwa? Why do you look so young?" Manhwa let out a soft sigh and told him he must have had another nightmare. His mind sprinted. Could this truly be a dream? His eyes snapped wide as pain slammed into him like a thunderclap. He barreled out the door, deaf to Manhwa's frantic protests that he shouldn't move with a wounded foot. He crept toward the statue, every nerve aflame, and lifted a trembling hand to touch it. He rammed his skull into that very statue, daring his father. Tears carved tracks down his cheeks as he whispered Manhwa. Then, voice raw, he asked her, "When did you place this statue?" She blinked, bewilderment flickering in her eyes, then snapped, "That was 5 days ago." His chest slammed with each breath as her words echoed in his skull, disbelief burning through him. 5 days, he ground out, vowing he'd find out for himself. He shot his head forward and slammed it into the statue with bone-shuddering force. Gasps exploded around him as everyone, Manhwa included, screamed his name in stunned disbelief. Blood slid down his forehead as he clenched his teeth, fierce determination burning through him. He tore back into the past, breathless. Only 3 years remained until the day the Tianzong clan would fall. His voice cracked with iron resolve as he swore to protect his people and clan at all costs. That vow came from Yonghua An. Once a proud martial house, the Tianzong clan guarded the slopes of Tianzong Mountain in Henan for generations, and many households claimed the mountain's name as their own. The Yong clan welded every rival into one dominion. Once all Henan hailed them as the Tianzong Yong clan, and the few who remembered still spoke of their blazing glory. Now those days were gone, their reputation shattered and praise vanished. The clan head cradled his tea, weariness carved into his face, and with a long, heavy sigh he admitted 30 years had passed without a single martial expert rising from their line. Since Elder Yonggosang, once hailed as the supreme dragon of Henan, the clan had shriveled into a shadow of its former glory, and even the people now looked down on them. He spat the confession like venom, bitterness blazing through every word. It was a truth they couldn't deny. She pressed the steaming cup into his hands and tried to console him, pleading that they stake their hopes on Warren. Pray he recovers and one day leads the clan into a better future. Bayong shook his head, voice raw as he reminded her she knew how much the foreigner hated him. Every choice came from care. His son called it pure cruelty. And Bayong drowned in guilt, sure he'd destroyed everything by remarrying too soon after his first wife's death, and admitting he hadn't even properly grieved before bringing another woman into the household. She shot him a gentle, knowing smile and said patience might be all they needed. Warren might just need more time. Biang's brow nodded as he admitted he'd thought the same at first, but the gulf between them only widened with the years. 5 days ago he went to see his son and found Warren had set a statue in the garden and told him to pretend that stone was him, and with a bitter laugh he apologized to his wife, saying he'd been complaining too much. Yonhua barreled toward them, panic burning in her eyes. Tears blurred her vision as she cried out for the clan head. Beiyang jolted back at her sudden appearance and demanded, "Why are you in such a hurry?" Yonhua gasped for air, fighting to speak as tears streaked her face. Byung barked for her to stop crying and spell out what was wrong, and through ragged sobs she blurted that young Master Huaren had hurt himself and fallen unconscious. Byung and his wife stopped dead, stunned into silence, while the clan head's eyes flew wide and he erupted in disbelief. The young man lay unconscious on his bed, sweat beading on his brow as he thrashed, trapped in the iron grip of a dream. The dream dropped him at the edge of a dazzling waterfall as his younger self laughed and splashed through the spray, while his real mother sat nearby, smiling as she watched. She murmured, asking if he loved the waterfall's thunderous rapids that much. Young Warren whooped with pure joy that he did, and jabbed a finger at Koi, streaking everywhere through the spray. He hauled the colossal fish he'd caught into the air like a champion, beaming as he cried out for his mother to come see how enormous it was. The instant he turned to her, color bled from his face. Her upright posture gave way and she crumpled to the floor. The scene ripped away and he found himself in her room. She lay pale and frail on the bed, each breath a weak whisper, and tears streaked the boy's face. She reached out, gently beckoning him closer, then apologized with a breaking voice. She couldn't go with him to the waterfall anymore to catch koi fish. Warren crushed his face into her chest, sobs racking him as he choked out "Mom." She, nearly spent, stroked his hair with a trembling hand and whispered she was fine, begging him to stop crying. Then her voice snapped into a twisted, cavernous growl, barking at him to choke back his damned tears and flinging weakling like a curse, as her gentle face contorted into a hideous, monstrous mask. In her place loomed a demonic old man, cruelty carved across his face and a sinister smile twisting his mouth, and he snarled he'd take Foreign's head as a trophy. He unhinged his jaws, baring razor teeth as his mouth stretched impossibly wide. The boy's scream tore from his chest, terror echoing as he shouted for help. A raw gasp tore from Warren as he jolted awake from the nightmare and shot upright. Panting, he ripped his gaze across the room, every sweep showing how shaken he still was. Everything around him looked like home, but felt like a stranger wearing its face. Recognition hit him like a thunderclap. It was his childhood room, and his breathing slowed. A single thought slammed into him. If this really was his old room, he'd been hurled back into the past, the time when rage for his father boiled in his veins and he severed himself from his family, and when the clan finally crumbled to dust. But now, if he truly had returned to this time, then maybe he could stop it all from happening. He pressed his lips into a hard line and vowed he would change his father's fate, his family's fate, and the clan's fate, because he knew exactly what the future held. Just then, a searing heat exploded inside him. His eyes shot wide as it raced through his body. Outside, a knot of attendants leaned in, whispering about the recent commotion, and one claimed young Master Hwarin had rammed his head into a statue, shattering it. One scoffed, deriding it as impossible. Warren had always been frail and bedridden, never even trained in martial arts. Another swore she'd seen it with her own eyes. Murmurs tightened into panic, someone hissing that he must have been possessed. The door to Warren's quarters burst open with a deafening slam. A gasp ripped through the women when they beheld him trembling inside. One tried to speak, stammering, "Young master," before her words died, inside. Hwarin clutched his head and stomach as his body convulsed uncontrollably, panic tearing through his thoughts. Something was very wrong as searing heat scorched him and energy exploded from his lower dantian like wildfire. His eyes snapped wide with terror as the thought hit. He needed a woman. The realization slammed into him, a raw, untamed wave of youthful power roaring through him, and he hissed a curse inside his head. This was the old man's demonic energy, a tidal wave that crushed the air. If he didn't act, control would snap. His body convulsed as searing heat raced outward, panic roaring that unless he forced himself back now he'd do something he'd regret, without another thought. Attendants sucked in shocked breaths and cried out that the air outside still bit like ice. Their young master was nearly naked and had no business dashing about, and if he came to harm they'd be the ones blamed. Warren sprinted on, heat trembling through his body, until he burst into the bamboo forest and ground his teeth. He wrenched himself forward. Standing still would let the old man's energy devour him whole, and at last he staggered into the familiar roar of the waterfall. Steam exploded off him the instant the icy water struck. Relief crashed over him, a shaky smile cracking across his face as he silently thanked the heavens. He was saved. A voice ripped through the air. Warren spun, his eyes snapping wide as he turned. Yongbyung, his father, barreled toward him, and Father Hwarin whispered, disbelief choking every word. Byung plunged into the water, his face a ghostly mask of fear. He yanked his son into a desperate, crushing hold, tears streaking his face as he roared, "Did you really want to die?" He reminded him, voice cutting through the cold. Even if he hated him, he should not throw his life away like this, not on such a freezing day. His eyes raked Warren's forehead, begging for any sign he was okay after he injured himself. Warren stood silent for a beat. A tremor shook his heart. He'd missed his father more than he dared admit, but he couldn't suddenly burst into affection, or everyone would find it odd. So he vowed to edge closer naturally, step by step, slowly. Emotion set his eyes ablaze as an inner voice whispered that he was truly back. If this was a dream, he begged to never wake. If an illusion, he prayed his eyes would never open. 3 months later, a quiet afternoon found Warren perched on a creaking wooden dock beside his younger half-brother, young Ki-jun, as they cast their lines into the still water. Ki-jun cackled and taunted that he'd win their bet. Hwarin laughed and shot back. "Have you been fishing your whole life to be this sure of yourself?" Inwardly, Hwarin felt how different everything had become. Over the past 3 months, he'd grown much closer to his family. In his previous life, he barely spoke to Ki-jun, but he remembered Ki-jun's younger brother training in the clan's secret martial art, only to have his chi slammed shut, stalling Ki-jun's rise and tearing the Tianzhong clan's power down until it was reduced to a mere branch of the Yuki clan. And Hwaran, married into the Sky Ocean Merchant Union and buried in business, found out too late. Ki-jun's voice yanked him from his thoughts. The boy blurted, "Is it really all right that Hwarin stopped his prescribed meds?" Hwarin shrugged, casual as ever. "Those medicines made me fat," and Ki-jun cocked his head, baffled. With wide-eyed innocence, he asked, "When were you ever fat?" Hwarin jumped, stammered, then rushed to correct himself. He only meant he'd get fat if he kept drinking them. Ki-jun's grin split his face as he hoisted his basket to flaunt the shiny fish he'd caught and teased Warren, saying he liked how Warren had been lately. He'd been slipping him extra allowance under the guise of bets, so the other guy crowed triumphantly, brandishing a bulging basket and asking if he'd won. Warren only smirked, mischief sparking at his lips. He flung his basket into the sky and roared he wouldn't lose again, and Ki-jun's jaw dropped in outrage as he screamed that his brother was cheating. Hwarin whooped, snatched Ki-jun with a grin splitting his face, and crowed he'd already landed an even bigger fish. Then he lunged and yanked Ki-jun into the lake. They slammed into the water as Ki-jun screamed and Hwarin howled with laughter. Inside, Hwarin crumpled, sorrow clawing at him as he finally grasped how bright and cheerful the child Ki-jun had always been. In his previous life, he'd saddled his brother with too much weight. Regret coiled in his gut, and he swallowed a silent apology. Months blurred as Warren hurled himself into relentless training, driving his body to the brink every day to forge strength before he even began martial training, and a cold worry nagged at him. The demonic old man's energy still lingered inside. It hadn't come back to bite him yet, but because of that time it had once surged uncontrollably. Each dawn he plunged into meditation beneath the thunderous waterfall to steady his chi. One day, the instant he broke his trance and opened his eyes, Warren strode forward and told her she didn't have to do this for him. She chuckled shyly, said she enjoyed it and liked being his friend now, and her smile hit him like a blade. Regret flooded his heart because in his past life he'd treated her cruelly despite her kindness. Siolan crackled with life, lived for fireworks festivals and kept offering to take him, but he cut her off with cold, harsh refusals every time. The memory slammed back at him in sharp, vivid detail. She asked him sweetly to go to the festival with her. His glare froze the air, cutting her off before she finished, and he snapped that he had no time to waste playing with her. His gaze turned sinister, slicing the air as he hissed, "Never ask me again." That moment burned into memory as the last meaningful exchange they ever had. She slipped into the festival alone, and the night shattered when she was murdered there. He hunted down the truth about her death himself, and not long after an assassin silenced him. Now, yanking his upper robe on, Warren whirled to her and shot. "Isn't today the moon festival you mentioned?" Her eyes shot wide with joy as she blurted, "I thought you forgot!" He said he'd go, and she sprang up, squealing with giddy excitement. Foirine flashed a grin and insisted they go shopping for her before the event, and Siolan slapped her palms together, squealed with joy, and begged him to go at once. As he gazed at her cheerful face, Warren's heart hardened into iron resolve. This was another chance to live differently. He could not allow the same. To protect Siolan, Kijun, his father, and the entire Tianzong clan, he had to forge himself into an unbreakable bulwark, strong enough to shield his family and drag the clan back to its lost glory. Back at the training yard, Warren tore through laps with the other young men of the clan, each footfall slamming into the earth. He replayed the past in his mind, stunned at how his life had twisted into something unrecognizable. He pounded down medicine in his room and dove into towering stacks of books, never setting foot outside. Everything had changed, and ironically it was the old man's ominous aura that ignited it. His body itched to move, his muscles burned to be tested. He hungered to measure the improvements that had taken root inside him. His father's voice exploded into his thoughts, and he snapped his head around. Warren's gaze snapped to young Byung standing nearby, smiling warmly with pride sparkling in his eyes. "You really have changed," Byung declared, his voice thick with feeling. "My son has truly grown up." Crimson with embarrassment, Warren shot anxious glances at the other disciples and muttered that they were watching, but Byung shrugged off the worry, stepped forward, and clamped his son's shoulder. "And what does that matter?" He roared with laughter so everyone heard. "Warren, stop just exercising and officially start learning our family's martial arts." Warren hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. He confessed he'd been thinking the same thing, and Byung's face flared into a grin as he cried, "Really? I'll arrange an instructor for you right away." Warren faltered, then admitted he'd already chosen someone, setting his father's curiosity alight, but before he could ask further, she beamed and launched into her brother's arms while their father, amusement lighting his face and jealousy simmering beneath, mock scolded her with a teasing grin. "So now you only search for your brother and snub your father?" Solon laughed, spun like a flash and flaunted her new clothes, crowing, "My brother picked these. How do I look, father? Aren't they pretty?" Byung surrendered with a helpless sigh, admitting he had no argument. Siolan chuckled, honeyed and sure, declaring she loved him, and laughter erupted through the yard. Warren stood there, quietly smiling at the scene, but a cold truth hit him. His changed body didn't make him able to protect those he loved. He needed real, trained strength. He needed martial arts. Elsewhere, in a worn, silent training ground, a lithe figure tore through a relentless practice with balletic precision. A fine lady glided like silk, her sword cutting through the air in a single smooth arc. Her strikes poured like a tidal current, and she snapped her gaze up as someone closed in. "What drags you here, young Master Yong?" she demanded of Cooley. There stood Mo Byung, known as the Dragonflower Sword. Warren flashed a grin and admitted it had been ages since they'd last spoken. He confessed he had something to ask her, his voice awkward and stumbling as if he couldn't find the first word. Byung scrutinized him like a hunter, the rumors of his recovery snapping into place as real. She'd never spoken to this twisted young man before, and she couldn't imagine what kind of request he'd unleash when she asked him point-blank what he meant. Warren blindsided her, dropped into a deep bow, his voice a blade of steel as he declared, Master, train me in your swordcraft and claim me as your disciple. Snapping out of frozen shock, whispers clawed at her ears. He'd changed in recent months. Change crackled around him, yet she couldn't shake the doubt. Could a man really transform that easily? Warren had once burned with hatred, severing every bond to his family and clan. After a long, charged pause, shock slammed into Warren. He snapped at her, demanding to know why. Biang's voice cut through the room like cold steel. She was consumed with unraveling why the Tianzong clan's secret arts had stagnated and couldn't take a disciple. She strode away, a silent apology burning in her chest, unable to accept that someone could change overnight. Her rejection hit Warren like a gut punch. Bitter certainty seared. She still saw him as pathetic. Mobyung withdrew into silence, touching almost no one, and even among her clanmates almost nobody grasped the true depth of her skill. Warren had lived that future once before. She owned her power like a weapon, and her martial depth dwarfed everyone in the clan. He crashed to his knees before her, whipped back around and roared with blazing fury. They snarled. Why would the clan's eldest son grovel like this over something so trivial? He bellowed, "No, this isn't trivial to me," as memories of the life he'd lived slammed into him. Mobyung carried the fight against the Dabi sect on her shoulders, her sheer valor turning the tide. They slapped the title Dragon Blood Flower on her, a name never meant for a woman, and she seized it, stormed into battle, and poured every last drop of herself into rebuilding the Tianzong clan. A mysterious death swept her away. She'd given her life for the clan. He clenched his fists until his knuckles screamed, resolve igniting in his veins. He swore she'd never meet that fate again and vowed to protect her. Beyond pinned him with a searching stare. His whole demeanor had shifted. Could he really have turned over a new leaf? She took him as her disciple and swore she'd never use chi or the clan's martial arts. She knew with iron certainty he'd never pull it off. Determination surged through him. He seized the challenge. His fingers couldn't even brush her hair. Disbelief clawed at him as he realized the gap between them was that enormous. Biang spun on her heel and strode off, roaring that the victory was hers and she was leaving. Warren ground his teeth, refusing to bow to defeat. A roar ripped from him as he exploded forward at her again, bellowing that their duel wasn't over. They slammed him back down every time he fought to rise. She struck him again, each blow laying his weakness bare. A fierce surge ripped through him and a crimson, untamed aura erupted from his body. Shock ripped through her. A crimson aura erupted and she gasped. That's not the Tianzong clan's martial art. What on earth is that? Panic clawed at her chest as she screamed for him to snap back to his senses. His wooden sword shot up for another strike. She twisted at the last instant and slipped free by a heartbeat. His speed swelled into something terrifying. Like a lightning bolt, he struck again. She darted aside again, but relentless pressure slammed her backward. She ripped her blade free, called her technique into being as power coiled in her veins, and braced to unleash the soaring dragon emperor sword's first form. Warren's wooden sword skimmed her hair, disbelief nailing her to the spot. Foreign, a trembling grin fighting through bone-deep exhaustion, rasped. My fingers grazed you, Dragonflower Sword. No, Master Mobyung. Byung froze, disbelief smashing into him after that impossible moment. She gaped at the wreck his wooden sword had made. The wall blown to splinters by sheer force, and her eyes bulged as she whispered, "Just what was that?" Days blurred into sweat and steel as Horain hammered his sword techniques with relentless razor-sharp focus. Sweat gleamed on his skin, breath ragged and heavy as he ripped the blade through the air. Her hawk-like gaze tracked every movement, awe igniting in her chest. She'd never expected the young master to possess such raw talent. In just a few days, he devoured the forms of the soaring dragon emperor's sword and the azure bamboo sword. Once he had seemed utterly devoid of martial talent. Now he flowed through their moves with startling ease. When Warren finally let his weapon drop, he staggered, lungs burning, gasping for breath. He spun to her, eagerness crackling in his voice as he begged to know how he'd done, and Byung answered in a steady, unyielding tone. She declared that, though he hadn't unlocked the technique's deepest secrets, he was already wielding twin swords with flawless precision. For someone who'd trained so little, that feat was breathtaking. Warren let out a teasing chuckle, brushed her words aside, and declared she was praising him too much. Her gaze snapped sharp, and she pinned him with a steel stare, declaring his progress unreal. She couldn't reconcile the man before her with the frail, bedridden young master he'd once been, and his lightning-fast grasp forced her to admit, blunt and awed, that he was incredible. Her face went hard as the memory of his crimson aura blazed through her mind. He swore once more that he couldn't remember a thing, then plunged into an explanation. Memory gone fuzzy, he smirked and quipped that only she would lash out at the clan's eldest son so mercilessly with her dragonflower sword. Mo Biang refused to laugh. She froze in a stern, dead silence. Then at last she turned away. She snarled that since he refused to answer, she wouldn't pry any further. However, she snapped that duty to the Tianzong clan still bound her. She vowed to shadow his every waking second. Warren forced an awkward grin and confessed it sounded a little frightening. Warren sat at his desk. Martial arts manuals spread before him. Candlelight flickered as he devoured every line, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Wielding the soaring dragon emperor sword and the azure bamboo sword, clarity slammed into him. The Tianzong clan's martial arts were incomplete. Their roots weren't purely orthodox, so he knew this was inevitable. In his mind, he hunted the clan's art to its source. Long ago, the Tianzong progenitor was a lone martial artist roaming Henan, meting out justice. He claimed the demonic arts from the master of the hidden saint cult, a secret order perched on the razor's edge between orthodox faith and demonic darkness. He devoured demonic techniques, burning through sleepless nights as the progenitor, reshaping them into something terrifyingly new. Brandishing the azure bamboo sword, he fought tooth and nail to stay true to the path of justice. The process bled the power right out of those arts. They still churned out Henan's greatest swordsmen. But the cold truth cut through. Fusing demonic martial arts with orthodox cultivation left the system incomplete. The progenitor scaled a towering summit, but missed the supreme apex. To stave off unrest, he sealed the martial arts' true origins away. And over the ages, a truth buried for years clawed its way back into the light, its shadow swallowing the Tianzong clan. A jolt of triumph hit Warren. He cracked a savage grin, curled his fists into iron, and vowed only he could complete these unstable, half-formed martial arts. He'd seen the future and carried its knowledge. The next day, Warren sank onto the garden bench between his father and stepmother, the three of them swapping warm sips of tea while sunlight braided golden ribbons through the trees. With a calm that chilled the room, he declared he'd pay a visit to the Jai Gal clan. His father looked up, mild surprise flickering across his face, and demanded what business he had there. Warren shot back that he'd restored his health by learning martial arts. He marched to the Jai Gal clan to pay his respects. He'd been pledged to one of their daughters before he even drew his first breath. Yongbiang leaned back, released a thoughtful sigh, and nodded, his agreement sharp and undeniable. He gaped at how time had sprinted past. Long ago they'd sealed Huaran's marriage into the Jiggle clan, and when Huaran confirmed it, the daughter's name slammed into his mind. Jigal Chongyong. Byung beamed, saying he'd been close friends with Yegal Yu-Gi-Oh, that Yegal would be thrilled to see Huaran, and that he'd heard Chongyang was a breathtaking beauty. He barreled into the question, snapping at his son to say when he'd leave and cutting Warren off before he could answer. His stepmother bristled, insisting he'd only just recovered and needed to rest longer. Biang roared with laughter and shot back that his son was of age now, insisting travel and new friends were the lifeblood of youth, as he recalled meeting Yegal Yugal at about the same age. She finally relented, jaw hard and steel in her voice as she warned him to be careful in foreign lands. The journey would take more than a month, so he would need a reliable bodyguard. A few days later, Huaran ran into Mo Biang again, who fixed him with a faint, irritated glare. He greeted her with a bright grin, but his curiosity spiked when he spotted two unfamiliar men standing behind her, and he blurted, "Who are they?" The other scoffed, declaring his frame anything but large. They declared in unison the rumors were true. He'd been training in martial arts, and he looked and moved like a different man. Huaran's eyes snapped. He recognized them in a heartbeat. Hongwook and Namwook, the rising ghost blades. He gave a slight bow and murmured, it was an honor to meet them. One man laughed and grinned that he and the dragonflower sword would stop at nothing to protect him. The other cocked his head and noted Huaran's body could be forged into far greater strength. Huaran inwardly judged them muscleheads, but he couldn't deny their deadly skill, for the rising ghost blades were masters of the ghost blade technique. His father had poured himself into choosing them as his protectors. When it was time to leave, Huaran rallied them, vowed he alone would chart their course, and demanded one thing, follow without question. Young Wook locked eyes with him. Silence thickened, then gave a hard nod and answered that. He wouldn't hesitate, he'd obey. With their agreement sealed, Huaran squared his shoulders and readied himself to depart. Before departing, he strode over to his family and offered a last, resolute farewell. Solon crumpled into tears, clutching him and begging, "Do you really have to go?" He ruffled her hair gently and vowed, "When I come back, I'll take you to the festival." And she looked up, asking if he truly meant it. They charged him with protecting Seolon and the rest of the family in his absence. Chijong's eyes went wide as he looked up. His brother towered over him, taller than he'd ever remembered. He snapped back, voice like iron, swearing he'd lay down his life to shield their family. Finally, he bellowed a final farewell and braced to vault onto his horse. Someone barreled toward him, lungs burning, screaming for him to wait. Young-wook cut in, snapping at him to refuse. The journey was far too dangerous for a girl. Warren shot a hand up to stop him, then dismounted the prostitute at his side. He reached her and thrust his hand forward. Manhwa flinched, bracing as if a blow were coming, and barely whispered an apology. Warren swept her into a crushing embrace. She gasped, stunned. She confessed she'd always yearned to stand at his side. He brimmed with gratitude for her presence, then warned the path he was taking was terrifyingly dangerous. He choked out that he wasn't strong enough to protect her if she came with him, and he wouldn't let her be harmed for his sake. She wasn't just an ally, she was the family he adored, and he begged her to stay behind with his parents, Kijong and Sai-Olin. Tears pooled in Yeonhwa's eyes, but she smiled and vowed she would finally do it. Hwarin vaulted back into the saddle, spurred his steed, and thundered away with his companions as their hooves hammered toward the horizon. He braced himself, sure that when he returned to the Tianjiang clan, much would have changed. He swore to shield his family and halt his clan's downfall, and it all began when he set out to complete the incomplete martial arts. A cold truth hit him. The trip to the Jaegal clan was nothing more than a cover. On that sacred peak, he was convinced the secret to perfecting the Tianjiang clan's martial arts waited. So he clenched the reins until his knuckles went white, and whispered in his heart they were heading to Wudang. Days later, Hwarin lay in the stream's shallows, eyes locked on the endless, breathtaking sky above. Silence slammed into him, prickling his skin, and he murmured to himself that this place wasn't right. He hauled himself upright and staggered forward. A splintered wooden sign juts from the water, half buried beneath the surface. He froze, breath ripped from his chest, staring at the letters carved into the wood that screamed the name of the Tianzong clan. A jagged chill seized him, and the next instant the tranquil stream warped into a horrific vision. The Tianjiang clan burst into view before his eyes, devoured by ravenous flames, the night sky pulsing crimson, buildings crumbling into the inferno, the air choking on smoke and ash. Foirin let the wooden sign clatter from his hands, stunned, as his heart erupted into a violent hammering roar in his chest. He staggered forward and howled, "No! No!" His cries ricocheted as he tore through the burning ruins, calling out as if hunting for survivors. Then, a cavernous, icy voice ripped through the chaos, its words slammed into him like a hammer. Warren went rigid in an instant as the voice crashed over him. There was no mistaking it. It was the old demonic man, the very one who'd possessed his body in his past life before he regressed. And his arrival sent every nerve in Hwarin trembling. Scorn laced the old man's voice as he snarled that even after receiving the greatest, heaven-defying opportunity, Hwarin had squandered it on childish pursuits, that nothing could be changed. And he demanded Hwarin hand over his body, freezing fear in Hwarin's bones. Hwarin's choked in disbelief. The voice slammed into him. He recognized it and demanded to know how the old man had returned. The demonic figure's command died on his lips as the vision exploded into a spray of shattered glass. A blade's sharp slash tore through his thoughts, yanking him back to the moment as Mo Byung's voice sliced the haze and demanded to know what he'd been thinking during their spar. His eyes snapped wide as realization hit. He'd been swallowed by a trance. Mo Byung fixed him with a piercing stare, told him his focus had slipped again and asked, "Are you feeling unwell?" Warren averted his gaze and confessed in a whisper that he was fine, but he admitted sleep had abandoned him these past few days. Nearby, Jungwook and Namwook hoisted heavy stones, muscles burning with each punishing rep. Their bodies screamed with effort. Between ragged breaths, Jungwook glanced toward Foreign and urged that if the young master felt off, he should join training, laying out the matching river and lifting thrust flow as strength drills, while panting Namwook snapped for his brother to drive with his side muscles and keep the stones perfectly perpendicular as they hoisted them. Watching them, Warren barked a nervous laugh, shook his head, and blurted, "Maybe next time." But his smile vanished. His face went stone as he declared he had crucial news about their journey. They thundered down the dirt road on horseback as Warren unveiled his plan. He announced they'd detour to Mount Seven Sages before the Chaegol clan. Jungwook spun, eyes wide, echoing the name, and Foreign said he'd read a famed herbalist's book that claimed a hidden patch on Mount Seven Sages grew 100-year-old ginseng, and even named a near-mythical treasure, monkey wine, almost impossible to find in the Jianghu. And the moment monkey wine was mentioned, Jungwook and Namwook licked their lips and whispered the name dreamily as if already tasting it. Warren smirked, taunting them that he'd heard the rumors. The notorious two rising drunken ghosts, two souls who lived for liquor. Face flaming, Jungwook forced a rasping throat clear and shot out a defense, insisting they'd back the journey, but before he could finish, Mobyung cut him off sharply, her voice razor stern as she warned Hwarin that Mount Seven Sages sat perilously close to the demonic sect's territories. An orthodox clan like the Tianzong marching there would invite disaster. Hua faced her with unshakable calm, and demanded to know how anyone could prove they belonged to the Tianzong clan. He figured that if they were caught, they'd simply claim to be from some other group. Rage ignited in Mobian as she demanded how the Tianzong heir could speak of such dishonor as if it were nothing, roaring that their clan's pride wasn't some trinket to be tossed aside. Warren cut her off cold, voice like steel. Is pride worth anything when survival's on the line? What if a great enemy demanded my origin? He'd kneel and swear loyalty to a demonic sect in a heartbeat if it meant staying alive. Jungwook barreled in, throwing his weight behind Hwarin, shouting that an orthodox sect had no business fearing demonic factions and demanding they heed the young master's judgment as the wiser path. Mobyung spat, "You're only after the monkey wine." Hwarin, putting on an over-the-top show of sincerity, slapped a hand to his chest and swore his only aim was to bring ginseng back to his parents, admitting he'd caused them tons of trouble before and promising to make amends. Mobyung faltered at his words as the fire in her chest cooled. After a long, heavy pause, she finally relented. "If he insists," she said, "we'll go to Mount Seven Sages." Relief surged through Warren as he thanked them all and urged the group to make preparations at the nearby inn. But deep inside, a cold knot tightened in his gut. A sly grin twisted his lips as he owned the lie. Mount Seven Sages hid no ginseng or monkey wine. It guarded something far more valuable. The demonic poisonstone flower. He remembered its venomous nature with brutal clarity. For centuries, poisonous insects swarmed to certain spots, crawling there to die when their time came. Their venom pooled and crystallized into a jagged poison shard. When a seed landed on it, it erupted into a flower oozing venom and crackling with demonic energy. His heart lurched. This was the demonic poisonstone flower, and he knew its venom lay hidden somewhere deep within Mount Seven Sages. That evening at the inn, rumors ignited among the martial artists, and from a nearby table, Horan's ears pricked as a group hissed about demonic masters massing by Mount Seven Sages. A man slid up to his companions and whispered that they'd unearthed a rare medicine there, the demonic poisonstone flower. Warren froze, shock slamming into him as frustration burned through his thoughts. How could the whole world already know about it? Mobyung warned, voice heavy. You must have heard the rumors. Demonic masters are converging on Mount Seven Sages because of that flower. It's far too dangerous to go there now. Warren swallowed hard and in a quiet surrender admitted she was right. The demonic sects would fight tooth and nail to claim it. He clenched his jaw, shoved down his hesitation, and told himself he wouldn't be dragged into their struggle. Only one thing mattered. Defeat, go choke. In his previous life, he was the very last soul to snatch the flower. In only 6 months, Gochuk blasted from first rate to the apex, fueled by the demonic poisonstone flower. This ingredient will supercharge his martial arts. It's perfectly tuned to his style, because Tianzong's techniques are, at their core, demonic arts. Mobyung shot to her feet, disbelief burning her voice as she snapped. Haven't you heard the demonic sects are already gathering there? Hwarin kept his cool and declared Mount Seven Sages one of the Jaggle clan's roots. If the Jaggle were bound to show up, he insisted meeting them there could be worth a shot. One rule blazed in their minds. The moment they crossed paths with martial artists stronger than them, they had to bolt instantly. Hwarin nodded, swore he'd steer clear of any dangerous confrontations, then snapped his gaze to Jungwook and Namwook. He stumbled in and discovered the 2 ghost blades sprawled at the table, drunk and knocked out cold. They barreled into a nearby inn and checked in. Warren told his companions they'd stay there for the time being. He swallowed the bitter truth. The mountains were a gallery of chaos, and he was far too weak to storm in recklessly. A wicked grin curled on his lips as he vowed inwardly that whoever snagged the last laugh would be the true victor. Earlier that day, he'd barked orders to his crew. Scour inns and taverns run by the Serpent Dragon sect and find those with few customers but overflowing stables. He figured Gochuk, the young sect leader, wouldn't travel alone. Even if Gochuk snatched the flower, he wouldn't haul it off at once. He'd detour to an inn to stash and lock it, and that inn was almost certainly run by his own sect. If they could pinpoint that secret spot, the outsiders swore they'd cut Gochuk off and snatch the flower before he stashed it away. Gochuk had claimed it before. This time Warren was coming to seize it for himself. Hwarin and Jungwook stood on a balcony, eyes locked on the street below. Jungwook jabbed a finger into the crowd and snapped to him. That's none other than Gochuk! He clenched his jaw. Gochok should have already been storming Mount Seven Sages to fight for the flower, so why the hell was he standing here instead? A henchman of Gochak slid in close and hissed something into his ear. Foreen leaned in, straining to catch the words as they blurred into static. Suddenly a sharp curse ripped from his throat. His voice ripped across the street. He snapped orders at his men. He thundered that the serpent dragon had devoured swords and demanded the serpent dragon slashers assemble immediately to give chase. Jungwook flinched at the booming command and told Hwarin those were the serpent dragon sect's two mightiest forces. Gochuk's shout had cracked the air so hard even Jungwook heard it. Hwarin's eyes slitted. If that urgent stir was real, it spelled opportunity, and their chances of snatching the demonic poison stoneflower just shot up. With calm determination, he ordered his companions to ready themselves and declared they'd follow. Her face flared with protest as she demanded, did he really intend to chase the demonic sex? Reminding him it was far too dangerous, then scolded him for plunging into ever more perilous situations. He warned her the Jianghu would soon erupt into upheaval, and only by growing stronger could they survive. He insisted on the demonic poison stone flower. Mo Bi-young snapped him silent, roaring that the Jianghu was at peace and they weren't weak enough to hide behind poisonous herbs for protection. Quarren's voice iced over as he declared she was wrong, snarled that they were weak, and demanded, did she truly have no desire for the flower? He answered for her, snapping, of course not. Any martial artist would pounce on a treasure like that. Powerless to join the fight in the open, they hung back. He shattered the silence and declared his dream. He swore he'd seize the flower, forge himself into true strength, and shield their clan from every outside threat. He closed the distance and pinned her with a dagger stare. If she truly believed in him as the heir of their clan, she'd obey his command. Mo Bi-young staggered back, stunned by the steel in his voice. She swallowed, admitting to herself that the young master who once barely managed now stood before her with a resolve she'd never witnessed. A thunderbolt slammed into her. Had she only now realized she'd never seen him as a true adult until this moment? Jungwook exploded into laughter, slapping his hands together in delighted applause. Then confessed he'd never realized the clan's very heir had already ignited a fierce vow inside him. Jungwook and Namwook sank into deep bows, pledging themselves to his leadership, then crisply declared they were the two rising ghost blades and vowed to obey every command of their young clan leader. Mo Bi-young bowed her head and swore to Hwarin that she, too, would follow his will. She leveled a grave warning at him. Jianghu isn't a place to be toyed with. One false step and it'll tear you apart. A shadow devoured his thoughts. He mouthed a silent vow to her, for in the entire Jianghu, no one knew its cruelty like he did. He'd already survived it once. They ghosted behind the serpent dragon sect at a wary distance, slipping under the forest's canopy as Hwarin's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected so many of their members to be gathered here. Mo Bi-young hunched low in the bushes, slid in close and hissed into his ear, worry burning through every word. She flagged the serpent dragon sect's movements and Hwarin answered in a low, dangerous whisper. Gochok and his men seemed to be closing in, their ranks snapping into an inescapable net formation. Jungwook's eyes snapped wide with alarm as he spat the formation's name. Namwook's voice trembled as he urged them to bolt before it was too late. And Hwarin shook his head, warning the serpent dragon sect's main squad hadn't made their move yet. They'd pounce the moment they spotted someone suspicious, or the person carrying the miracle medicine. So they had to bite down on patience and wait for the perfect moment. Moments later, a thunderous roar shattered the silence from the distance where the serpent dragon sect was stationed. Hwarin's ears snapped to attention. Dread slammed through him. The enemy had tracked down the bearer of the miracle medicine. When Namwook asked why, he barked orders and urged the group to bolt for the riverbank instead. Hwarin barked that anyone on the run would bolt for the water, not vanish into the dense forest, and his eyes cut to the eerie hush where the serpent dragon sect's shouting had died away. He snapped, from here on out move like shadows, silent and unseen. Moments later a man staggered into view at the river's mouth, gasping and choking out a broken plea for help. Then a crackling purple aura burst from nowhere, struck him down and he fell dead on the spot. A lone figure exploded into view. At the riverbank's center a man stood wreathed in a menacing purple aura, gripping the demonic poison stone flower as its sinister glow fed the terrible dread pouring off him. A flying demonic bloodlion loomed overhead. When she spoke, fear and unease rippled through the group. Hwarin locked onto the man and declared his aura ominous. They asked Mo Bi-young if she knew more about him, but Jungwook cut in, roaring that among the demonic world's martial artists the flying demonic bloodlion was notoriously feared, and Hwarin's eyes narrowed as he warned the man's condition looked dangerously unstable. His eyes snapped open the instant he saw what the man clutched. The demonic poison stone flower pulsed in his grasp, and their thoughts slammed to a halt. Gochuk surged forward to confront him, accusation ringing in his voice as he thundered that the Blood Lion had slaughtered their sect's most elite warriors, then admitted he never imagined he'd be forced to corner a figure like this. The moment had come. The flying demonic Blood Lion threw back its head and unleashed a cruel, mocking laugh. He sneered, taunting that he'd never expected to be cornered by such weaklings, and that if the Tang clan hadn't stepped in, he'd have ripped them apart with ease. He flipped it out, revealing a tiny, needle-like weapon, locked eyes with the Blood Lion and asked if it recognized the blade, then declared it the Thousand-Needle Downpour. At the sight of it, shock seared across the Blood Lion's face, and he demanded, "How did Gochuk get his hands on a weapon like that?" Gochuk smirked, admitting they'd burned a king's ransom to secure it, and snarled that it wasn't the only one they had. In a single heartbeat, every man of the Serpent Dragon sect unsheathed the identical blade. Rage snapped through him. He snarled that such inferior weapons could never bring him down, and his arms erupted in a savage, unstoppable surge of energy. Gochuk didn't hesitate. He roared the command, and his men unleashed a hail of gunfire. The air detonated in a deafening barrage of explosions as a thousand-needle downpour unleashed lethal rain. Countless razor spikes plummeting toward the flying demonic Blood Lion. They exploded out of their hiding place, swallowing nearly the entire riverbank. Warren's eyes snapped wide in disbelief as his mind sprinted. Could the Blood Lion really possess such overwhelming strength? The Serpent Dragon sect unleashed a thunderous assault on the barrier, but the Bloodline parried every strike. A shockwave blasted outward, knocking even Gochuk back as he planted his feet and howled in disbelief, roaring, "How do you still have this much chi?" He loomed above them, wild-eyed, erupted into manic laughter, and taunted the Serpent Dragon sect that they were nothing beside him. Grinding his teeth, Gochuk thundered, "Second Serpent Dragon Squad, open fire!" Once again, the thousand-needle downpour ripped through the air, peppering the Blood Lion with a hail of razor needles. He plunged into the river below, and a Serpent Dragon sect member crowed instantly, declaring the flying demonic Blood Lion had fallen. Gochuk barked again, snapping an order for the 8th sword of the Serpent Dragon and the Serpent Dragon Bladesman to finish him off and seize the miracle medicine. Needles jabbed into him, but he hauled himself upright, a defiant smirk carved across his face. A chilling laugh ripped from him as he snarled they'd never find the miracle medicine. Then he bellowed, "Come!" and vowed to drag them all down to hell with him. What followed? Blood slick and airborne, the demonic lion lunged alone to annihilate the Serpent Dragon's sex forces. He ripped them apart with brutal, merciless fury as they swarmed in from afar. Hwoarang and his group stood frozen, silence pressing down like a stone, while Mo Byong's thoughts raced inside her. Shock slammed into her. She'd never seen a bloodbath this horrific. She zeroed in on the young master, disbelief clawing at her. How? Fresh to the Jianghu, he watched the carnage with an unnerving, ice-cold calm that shouldn't have belonged to someone so green. The tide flipped. The Blood Lion was struck relentlessly until his body couldn't endure. Countless arrows embedded in him, a sword lodged deep in his back, blood gushing into the river and staining the waters red. His strength failing, he staggered, then finally collapsed into the river ran crimson, his lifeless body drifted downstream. Gochuk roared, ordering his men to search him at once. The search party burst in, panic shredding their voices as they stammered. "The miracle medicine isn't on him." Rage cracked Gochuk's voice as he barked for another sweep. Certain they'd been on the Blood Lion's tail during the chase, he swore the beast couldn't have hidden it and ordered a frantic, faster search. Hwoarang beckoned his companions to follow, his voice slicing through the air as he laid bare his deduction. It slammed into him. The miracle medicine wasn't on the Blood Lion's corpse. He barked, reminding them that earlier the Bloodline had conjured a towering wall of water. It blotted out his sight of the enemies. A warrior of his caliber should have danced through those attacks with Qinggong. Hwoarang concluded the only reason the Bloodline had chosen that tactic was, he hurled the miracle medicine into the roaring current, a calculated move so he could pull it back out later. Warren shoved his companions into motion, urgency roaring in his voice as he warned them to hurry. The Serpent Dragon sect would reach the same conclusion any moment. At the end of the river, Hwoarang and his band finally surged into view. There, bobbing on the glassy water, gleamed the very flower they'd been searching for. They screamed, "It's the demonic poison stone flower!" He yanked out a tiny glass vial of poison and slid it back into its hiding place. He fished a small container from his pocket, eyes sweeping the ground, then plucked an ordinary flower. The flower writhed and snapped into the demonic poison stone flower's exact sinister likeness. Mo Byong gaped, shock igniting her tone as she hissed, "An orthodox martial artist must never carry poison." Cool as ice, Hwoarang called poison a useful weapon. slid the fake flower into the container, and warned it wouldn't fool the demonic sex for long. It would dupe them, giving the group the opening to bolt with the real one. Young-wook gaped, stunned that snagging the flower had been absurdly easy, their luck glaring beside the men who'd risked their lives for it. He never imagined they'd end up claiming it just by trailing behind. Warren let a thin smile ghost across his face, shrugged that they'd been lucky, shouted for the group to scatter as he clenched the container like a lifeline. They froze. Shock hit like a physical blow as the familiar figure stepped into view and stood before them. Battered and dripping blood, he hauled himself to his feet and, with a chilling, echoing voice, declared the demonic poison stone flower his. Moby Young lunged at Foreign, her voice splintering with panic as she cried out the young clan leader's name. Foreign froze, disbelief clawing at his mind as he realized the man before them was the flying demonic bloodlion, the very beast the serpent dragon sect should have already finished. And before he could react further, shock nailed him to the spot. The strike catapulted him through the air. The bloodlion snatched the container into his hand and crushed it instantly, the flower the only thing left unscathed. His voice crashed like thunder as he lashed out at Warren and his companions, spitting greedy rats who didn't know their place. He snarled that he'd meant to savor the flower and absorb it properly, but he'd been forced to burn away his life as true chi. So with that luxury gone, he vowed to rip apart every human before him and refill his power with their blood. He snatched the demonic poison stone flower and gulped it down in a single lightning-fast motion. A menacing, relentless aura detonated from his body, swallowing the air around him. Panic ripped through her thoughts and she forced herself to admit. This was For the first time, she stood before an opponent whose raw power dwarfed everything she'd ever faced. With the world closing in, she was certain she'd die here. And at that moment, Namwook cut in first, snarling that from his very first breath he'd charged before thought. That's how he earned the name Ghostblade. Shoulder to shoulder, the brothers roared their claim. They were the two rising Ghostblades. The Tianzong warriors swore to shield their young leader, stepping up to face the demonic monster before them, and roaring that they would bring down the flying demonic bloodlion. Mobyong screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged to stop them, begging that he was far too strong and warning they'd surely die if they tried. Youngwook sliced through her words, his voice a steady razor as he barked that she must do what needed to be done, calling her by her title, the Dragonflower Sword. Namwook spun to her, a sly smirk playing on his lips, and reminded her their enemy had just gulped down poison. Her mind flashed back to Warren earlier, slipping the real flower away and replacing it with a poison-laced fake. The realization steeled her trembling resolve. Namwook warned the bloodlion lay gravely wounded, had scorched away his life energy into true chi, and, worst of all, had poisoned himself. If they could buy even a few seconds, they'd have a fighting chance. Youngwook roared they'd strike first. The two brothers hurled themselves forward, blades bared and flashing as they tore into the heart of the fight. The bloodlion's eyes flashed with cruel admiration, as he admitted he respected them for refusing to flee, then sneered that their courage meant nothing and snapped into motion. A blazing yellow aura erupted at the battlefield's heart, swelling into an impenetrable barrier that slammed the bloodlion backward. Mobyong lunged in, her blade streaking light as she invoked her technique, roaring, "Soaring Dragon, Emperor Sword," and instantly ripped into another strike, detonating the heavenly lightning ascension. Confusion dragged his thoughts inward, then a cold clarity struck. The searing sensation coursing through his body was poison. A single dark suspicion snapped into place. Had the Tang clan's old crone gotten to him? He snapped the thought away. Tang clan poison would have already eaten through his organs by now, so the source had to be different. His words snapped into a threat. He swore he'd grind their bones to dust. Then another violent cough cut him off. From a distance, Mobyong sucked in a steady breath, steeled her thoughts, and the truth slammed into her. Ghostblade had been right. The bloodlion teetered on the brink of collapse. If they could hang on just a little longer, victory might still be theirs. A bitter laugh exploded from him, roaring for a heartbeat before crumbling into a ragged rasp. He choked out, "Is this really going to be my grave?" He clamped both hands to his skull, snarling that it couldn't be. There was no way he'd be brought down by the Tang clan, or by the laughable weaklings of the serpent dragon sect. His sinister gaze snapped up to a group of nameless nobodies, hatred blazing as he hissed that the one he'd hurled earlier must have been clutching the real demonic poison stone flower. If so, he'd rip open that person's stomach and gulp its contents to steal the power, his body quaking with savage energy as he crept forward. He exploded into a leap, catapulting himself forward. Namwook was his target. He locked on and struck with brutal, instant precision. Her sword flashed again, but his bloodline snapped him into a new position with a deadly technique. He snapped into the shifting step and, in a heartbeat, vanished from her path. They reappeared right in front of Young-wook, and he didn't have a single second to react before the blood lions lunged. He sent him crashing through the air as Young-wook hit the deck. The blood lion snapped its bloodthirsty gaze to Mobi-young and hurtled toward her. Terror slammed into her and pinned her in place. She froze, her mind howling that she couldn't dodge as his hand lunged for her. Steel tore the air as Hwarin exploded into view, his blade a lightning blur faster than the eye could track, and with one brutal strike he sliced clean through the blood lion's left arm. Earlier, after the winged demonic bloodline slammed him to the ground, Hwarin crumpled against a tree, its trunk ripped open where his body had slammed into it. He hacked up blood, each breath a ragged rasp, his limbs dead weight that wouldn't obey. His head spun. The blood lion had poured its very life essence into true chi, sacrificing itself just to hunt him. He spat a curse under his breath, frantic to move, but his broken, battered body wouldn't obey. His left leg had twisted out of place, and every groan he forced out ripped through him with bone-deep pain. He swallowed hard and admitted it. In all of Jianghu, no one understood the brutal price of that power like he did. Staring up at the sky with blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, he spat bitterly that he'd pretended to understand everything, only to discover he was shattered and helpless in this moment. He threw his head back and felt warm liquid snake down from his forehead. They screamed for him to surrender, then a crimson aura erupted and spiraled around his battered frame. A sinister mist coiled through the air, and Warren's thoughts sprinted, frantic and razor-sharp. A foreign energy had throbbed inside him for years, the same power that flared in that mysterious old man before his regression. He'd unleashed it once against Instructor Mo. Now certainty surged through him. He could unleash it again. If he pulled it off, it might vanquish the flying demonic bloodlion. A chilling voice echoed, ravenous and demanding his body, and Hwarin clenched his teeth as the force reached, trying to take control of him. A shadow clawed his mind toward unconsciousness. If he gave in, if he closed his eyes even for a moment, he feared the power would swallow him whole. He wrenched his eyes open and screamed at himself inside his own head. Was he really going to rely on this power again? He barked at himself to get a grip, refusing to be chained to some unknown force. Since when had he ever let something he didn't understand call the shots? Young Hwarin had leaned so hard on something he couldn't trust that the phantom voice crashed into him, clawing for his body. He bellowed for it to shut up. He clawed himself upright and snarled that this body was his own. He swore to guard everyone he loved, with nothing but his own strength, and his aura erupted into a blazing storm. He catapulted forward, slamming back onto the battlefield. He unleashed a thunderous slash that sheared off the flying demonic bloodlion's left arm, its scream of agony ripping through the sky. His eyes snapped to the crimson aura blazing from Hwarin. Recognition slammed into him. He stammered, trembling, and roared the demonic master's name, stunned as he demanded how this youth could possibly wield that force. Then his body convulsed. Mo-beong watched nearby, eyes snapping wide as realization slammed in. This energy was the exact same power Hwoarang had once revealed. Bloodied but alive, Jungwook and Namwook hauled themselves upright as Jungwook cracked a weary grin and hollered that the young clan leader had arrived at the perfect moment. They reformed in a heartbeat, blades brandished as they closed in on the weakened foe. Mo-beong snapped, "The bloodlion's poisoned. He's long since burned through his life essence. His body will collapse any moment." Warren's face went hard as stone. He fired his first command as heir to the clan, voice crisp and unrelenting. He roared one order: "Survive!" And the group answered as one, their vow of obedience thundering through the air. The bloodlion's gaze pinned Hwoarang in place. For a long, breath-stealing moment it studied him in silence. He threw his head back, voice chillingly calm, and confessed he'd faced countless mysteries in the world of Jianghu. Even he stood speechless, unable to fathom what was unfolding. He roared that from this moment on he'd surrender any chance of survival. He summoned a crushing tidal wave of energy for a finishing strike, his voice roaring with scorn as he told Hwoarang he had no idea how the boy had clawed his power back, then barked for Hwoarang to squirm with everything he had. None of it would save him. At that instant, blades aloft and spirits blazing, they hurled themselves into the clash. Later, the Serpent Dragon sect slammed into the battlefield, and Gochok's furious bellow split the air as he hurled a curse. He snarled under his breath, stunned the bloodline would dare siphon away his very life essence. The battlefield was still drenched in it. His features hardened, recognition slammed into him, and he whispered in disbelief. It was the bloodline arts. One of his soldiers shouted to him, breathless, "We found the body!" He loomed over the shredded corpse of the flying demonic bloodlion as another soldier, face ashen and trembling, leaned in and whispered that the man was dead. The soldier froze, then forced an answer out, his voice trembling like a struck wire. Gochuk exploded with rage, snarling that if the soldier dared claim it was missing, he'd sever his head right where he stood. At last the soldier's voice cracked and he choked out the truth. The flower wasn't there. Rage boiled in Gochuk as he lashed out with his sword in a savage arc, the blade rushing inches from felling the man. Who had the nerve to interfere? What fool tried to take on the flying, demonic bloodlion? Hwarin and the group tore off the battlefield on horseback. Hwarin, too wounded to ride alone, slumped against Mo Beong's back, while Young Wook kept Nam Wook steady in his saddle. Bloodied but grinning through pure exhaustion, Young Wook laughed, breathless and stunned, disbelief crackling in his voice as he roared they'd actually defeated the flying demonic bloodlion. Mo Beong snapped back, voice razor sharp, demanding what he meant by those words. She reminded him that if that bloodline had clung on a single heartbeat longer, every one of them would have been wiped out. Young Wook admitted it had been close, his grin drained into a solemn mask, and with quiet resolve he declared the truth. In the end, only those who survive are considered strong. Mo Beong answered coldly, declaring the flying demonic bloodlion was just one martial artist in all of Jianghu. He knew that, and that's why he hurled every ounce of strength into the fight. Behind her, Hwarin suddenly convulsed and hurled up more blood, crimson splattering across Mo Beong's back. Warren wrenched out a brittle laugh and owned she was right. Nothing was as easy as it looked, and he admitted he'd never imagined they'd end up facing a flying demonic bloodlion. Weight settled into his thoughts. He admitted any one of them could have died in that battle, yet his vow held firm. Determination burned as he spoke aloud, declaring his promise to protect his family and clan from harm had never been empty words, and he sealed it with his hand. He yanked out the demonic poison stone flower, slammed his hand onto Mo Beong's shoulder, and with a voice like iron vowed their road would be brutal. Days like this, when their lives dangled by a thread, would surely come again, and for that reason. He declared to Instructor Mo and the two brothers that they had to become stronger. Young Wook shot back immediately, brimming with confidence as he vowed they would. Mo Beong snapped the mood icy and said there was something else the young clan leader needed to explain, and Hwarin froze, thrown off balance, then shot back. "What do you mean?" Still in the saddle, Mo Beong flicked a wary glance back and demanded, "What is that ominous chi?" He snarled that the energy they'd just seen was a mere shadow, not the Tianzong clan's true power. A darker, more sinister pressure slammed into him, like stepping into the flying demonic bloodlion's own aura. Mo Beong snapped her head around, voice razor-sharp with accusation as she demanded to know if the young clan leader had learned demonic arts. Hwarin went stone still, a storm roaring inside as his thoughts sprinted. He knew the only way to tell the truth was to reveal his regression, and revealing it could rip the future into something no one could predict. Not now. After a brief silence, he finally broke his silence, refused them outright, and vowed he'd explain everything when the time came. Mo Beong's voice exploded with fury as she snapped that they'd just risked their lives together and demanded to know what else he could possibly be hiding. Before he could say more, his body sagged as strength bled away. Alarm flaring, Mo Beong shouted, "Are you all right?" His voice thin with strain, he admitted they'd gambled with their lives and swore they'd be the first to hear the truth when the moment came. Mo Beong fell mute, tension coiling in her as she bit back a question, wondering if Hwarin was dodging it while the group rode on in a thick, uneasy hush. Hwarin's coughing erupted into brutal fits, and Mo Beong barked for them to stop, insisting they needed a rest. After helping him down from the horse, she zeroed in on him, eyes sharp and worry lacing her voice as she urged, "You don't look well. Come with me to the Jigal clan. Let's find a physician." Warren shook his head and flatly refused, warning that Gochuk and the Serpent Dragon sect were still on their trail, and that going to the Jigal clan while hunted would only drag that clan into far worse danger. He snapped they'd go to Mount Wudang. Mo Beong's face tightened as he demanded if a physician truly lived there, and Hwarin nodded, saying he'd heard of a master healer surnamed Hai who lived on Wudang. He barreled after it, howling for it to stop and bellowing, "Back seal!" warning the cat that Mount Wudang was dangerous. The cat shot ahead again. Desperation burned in the boy as he shouted even louder for it to wait. The cat's eyes locked on it. The bush suddenly shuddered, and the cat jolted before freezing dead still. He lunged forward, snatched the cat into his arms, and roared, "I've got you!" Hwarin, Young Wook, Nam Wook, and Mo Beong ripped out of the undergrowth, launching themselves into view. Hwarin thrust trembling hands toward the boy, his face ashen and streaked with tears. and his voice collapsed into a desperate whisper. "We finally found a person." The boy and the cat snapped backward, fur and hair bristling, frozen by the sudden face-off. He exploded awake and catapulted upright, screaming the name of the flying demonic bloodlion. A few moments later, he braced himself, felt the threat drain from the air, stared at his hands and, in a raw whisper of hope, convinced himself his wounds had been treated. The door creaked open and the same boy from before burst in, relief flooding his face as he cried he was glad Warren was awake. Then he revealed Warren had been injured. So he'd hauled him here first. "This place," he added. He ran a tiny home with his grandfather, then barked at Warren to wait while he brewed some medicine. He fired the question, "By any chance is your grandfather Haeduk Gong?" And the boy nodded, that single motion confirming it. Warren's eyes slitted into knives as he snapped, "Is that boy Hai Chayul Ryung?" Startled, the boy's eyes snapped wide as he blurted, "How could Horain possibly know my name?" Warren balled his fist as his heart thundered, and realization slammed into him. A bolt of clarity struck him. He'd come to Mount Wudang for this. The Jaegal clan was just a cover, a stepping stone. The truth was the child. Warren's mind blasted through visions of a future he'd already lived, and he knew this boy was the key to completing the Tianzong clan's unstable martial arts. He was fated to become the future strongest man under the heavens. This child, Hei Chol Ryong, the one supreme. And in his previous life, Warren relived the ferocious struggle over a legendary martial arts tome. The conflict raged for years, pulling even the unorthodox and demonic clans into the fight beside the 5 great clans, exploding into an unprecedented clash. And the reason was brutally simple. The tome unleashed a seismic, never-before-seen martial arts principle. Within every human, light and darkness live side by side. When good and evil fused into one, a force surged forth that eclipsed any mere martial might. Whispers named it Zhang Sanfeng's legacy, the founding master of Wudang who descended into the heavens. Its name roared like legend, the yin-yang depth heaven tome in Warren's past life. The child snatched it. His family had stumbled upon it by chance while foraging for medicinal herbs, and with it, Hei Chul Ryong clawed his way to the summit, becoming the unrivaled martial artist beneath the heavens. The tome bound both good and evil. He burned with certainty he could finally turn the Tianzong clan's dream into reality. He thought to himself he'd pictured an earth-shattering cinematic entrance for someone destined for such greatness. He snatched it out of the air with one hand, his gaze never wavering. Warren's eyes snapped wide with shock. In a heartbeat, he recognized the motion. A tremor laced his voice as he blurted, "Has the boy already begun martial arts training?" Hai Chul Ryung flashed a knowing grin and revealed his grandfather had taught him the move. Shock ripped through Warren. His eyes flew wide and he choked out, "How can this be?" Right then, an old man strolled past the doorway, peered inside, and in a calm, steady voice said, "Warren's finally awake." And Warren's thoughts ignited in an instant. Realization slammed into him. The man was Hai Dukong. Later, Warren burst from the cramped clinic with the elder at her side. Outside, his companions waited. Young Wook thrust his broken hand into the air, beamed a bright, defiant grin, and shouted to the young clan heir. The 4, Hwarin, Mobiang, Zhang Wook, and Nam Wook, dropped into a crisp bow before Hei Dukong, as Hwarin stepped forward, declared he was Yong Hwarin of the Henan Tianzhuang clan, and thanked him for the gracious treatment. The dugong shook his head and brushed off the gratitude, insisting there was no need to thank him. Mending wounds was his duty. He let Tianzong roll off his tongue, curiosity crackling, then asked what had brought the Tianzong clan's young heir all the way here. Silence smothered the group, choking off every word. Warren wrestled a dazzling smile onto his face and announced he'd come to find ginseng. Dukong pinned him with a hard stare, admitted he carried medicinal herbs, and snapped that wild ginseng wasn't something you could just snatch. His eyes slid into a hard glare as he snapped, "What do you need it for, Warren?" A faint grin ghosted his lips, then sudden emotion ripped through him. He clutched his hand to his chest and crumpled into sobs, voice shaking as he revealed his mother lay gravely ill, saying his parents had nursed him through a frail, sickly childhood, and, thanks to their sacrifices, he'd finally escaped the clan to taste the wider world. But then, he pressed on. A courier arrived with the news that his mother had been struck down by a deadly illness. Rumors swirled that ginseng could cure her. Desperation clawed at him. He'd scaled Mount Wudang, then a single misstep sent him tumbling down the trail. Mobi Yong pinned him with a puzzled stare as doubt hissed that his story didn't add up. She still remembered his mother leaving, perfectly healthy and waving them goodbye. Curiosity burned in her. Why had the young clan leader spun such a brazen lie? And what would happen if Hai Duke Gong uncovered the truth? Then, to her astonishment, tears pooled in the elder's eyes as he listened, and Mo Byung's breath caught, stunned that his lie had actually worked. Sobbing uncontrollably, "Hey Duke!" Gong shouted that Hwarin was a true son, his voice splitting as pride and grief crashed over him at Hwarin's fierce devotion to his parents. He barreled back into the clinic, grabbed his equipment, and bellowed they'd head out this instant to hunt wild ginseng. Later that day, after hours of scouring every corner and coming up empty, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, Mo Byung had been certain Hwarin was lying about searching for ginseng. Now the steel in his eyes made her wonder if he actually meant it. Hwarin crawled like a man possessed over jagged rocks and through thorny bushes, desperation in every movement and his gaze razor-sharp. He barked for her to join him, snapped that standing there wouldn't help, and she had to start searching, then almost let the truth slip, bit it back mid-sentence, and lied that the ginseng was for his mother. Mo Byung flinched at the razor in his voice and forced out an awkward, tight-lipped yes. Hwarin wiped the sweat from his chin and forced himself to admit it wouldn't be easy. He said aloud, "That's unfortunate," as a cold truth settled inside him. Even knowing the future didn't guarantee success. Hai Dugong's eyes softened with sympathy as he vowed that if he found ginseng, he'd send him to Hwarin's clan, then asked if he should hand him directly to the Tianzong clan residence. Hwarin dipped a quick, grateful bow and said, "That would be appreciated." He dipped into a respectful bow, apologized, then pressed to stay a few more days so he could continue his search alone. Hwarin planted himself cross-legged in his room, a faint red aura spiraling around him as he dove into meditation. He shut out the world and vowed to scour every haunt Hai Duke Gong ever darkened, sure he'd dig up traces that led straight to the tome. Without this lead, the moment his meditation ended, he'd be forced to stumble through years of aimless searching. He snapped into a razor-sharp bow before Hai Duke Gong, who sat waiting outside. Hai Duke Gong fired the question at Hwarin, "You hiking with me again today?" And Hwarin straightened, shook his head, and declared, "I'll search alone this time." Morning exploded into crisp, bright air as a cool breeze brushed past them. Hwarin whirled and demanded where Chilryong had gone. Hai Duke Gong opened his mouth to answer. Then, right at that exact moment, Duke Gong and Farron bolted upright, hearts racing at his frantic rush. Duke Gong blurted, "Did you run into a tiger?" And Chilryong shook his head and explained. Between gasps, he panted that he'd hunted with Bexi all that morning, but when some people lunged to snatch the cat, he bolted. Dugong's face went cold. He echoed Chilryong, the truth spilling out. Fighters from Mount Wudang had recognized the cat as a mystic animal and tried to snatch it. And he threw a worried look at Hwarin, just as a pack of martial artists burst into the clinic, voices raised and one bellowing that they'd found it. She barked like a commander, scoffed that Chilryong was fast for a mere boy, snapped, "Is that cat yours?" and demanded he sell it to her on the spot. Chilryong clutched Bexiel to his chest like a shield and roared back, "That cat isn't for sale!" She scowled, irritation burning in her eyes, vowed to pay him handsomely, and demanded he hand it over. Chilryong refused again, his voice like steel. His cries yanked Jungwook, Namwook, and Mo Byung from their rooms, all alarmed by the commotion. Duke Gong strode forward, calm to the bone with his face locked in stern resolve. He offered a polite apology, then steeled his voice and declared, "Baekasiol is family. We won't sell him." She scoffed, sneering that if anyone else had been here, they'd have ripped the cat away. Then with a smug curl of her lip declared he should be grateful it was her asking and handed over. Hwarin pinned her with razor focus, thoughts cutting. Her arrogance blazed, and she tugged at a familiar memory, someone he'd known. He fixed her with a steely glare and told her bluntly that it was wrong to force someone to sell what they'd already declared not for sale. It had to stop immediately. One of the girls' guards brandished his sword and barked at Warren to back off, snarling, "Do you even realize who you're talking to?" Warren planted his feet, stared them down, and snapped, "Who do you think you are, daring to make that threat?" The guard snapped upright, shoulders squared, and roared that they hailed from the Jagal clan. He roared that the girl was the clan head's very own youngest daughter. Warren froze. The words hit him like a blow. His mind snapped into motion, and a cold shock slammed through him as he realized who she had to be. There she was, Yaegel Yohai, the younger sister of his fiancé, Yaegel Chongyang, a live wire ready to ignite everything. Hwarin realized why the Jagal guard swaggered. Being in service to the clan head's daughter pumped them full of arrogance. Still, Hwarin brimmed with respect, dipped into a crisp bow, and declared it an honor to meet a lady of the Jagal clan. The guard sneered down at him, voice laced with haughty contempt, and snapped, "Where are you from?" before Warren could answer. Jungkook surged forward, a frown carved into his face, and declared that he wouldn't stand for it. He unleashed a scathing rebuke and snapped, "Aren't you being far too bold for a mere guard?" Yongwook slammed his forehead against the guards and roared that they were from Henan Tian. He snapped, "We're only visitors on Mount Wudang, don't say another word." Yohei's patience snapped. She let out a dismissive huff and vowed she wouldn't waste a word on anyone who refused to reveal their true affiliation. Her gaze snapped to Cheol Ryung, and she barked 2 options at him. She leaned in, eyes hard, and snapped, "Take my money and hand over the cat or I'll snatch it from you." Cheol Ryung snatched Baxiol into his arms and staggered backward. The instant Yohei lunged for Baxiol, Cheol Ryung knew. Warren barreled in front, cleared his throat, and barked, "There's a third option." Irritation flaring, Yohei whirled back at him and pounced on the opening, snapping, "What do you mean?" Baxiol slammed into the earth, bolted into the forest, and vanished into the shadowed tangle of trees. Rage ripped through Yohei as he whirled on Hwarin, and she snapped, "How dare you interfere?" Hwarin snorted and shot back that if the cat had bolted, she only had to catch it. Succeed, and the boy would have no grounds to complain. Yohei balled her fists tight, frustration searing through her, and snapped a furious order at her guards. She barked, "Seize the cat!" The guards exploded into the forest, tearing through the underbrush like hounds on a scent. Hwarin shot a thumbs up over his shoulder at Cheol Ryung. The boy's grin exploded as he mirrored it, relief shining across his face. Later that day, the guards staggered back, armor askew and eyes wild with panic. Torn clothes clung to them, exhaustion carved hollows in their faces, and one finally choked out that they'd failed. Fire lit Yohei's eyes as she roared that not a single Jiggle Clan warrior could catch a cat. A cautious guard edged forward and insisted it wasn't a normal animal. He swore it was a mystic creature. Yohei scowled, fixed on her next move, declared she'd head to the Wudang sect, and barked for her men to chase the cat down until they caught it. Mo slid up behind Farin and whispered into his ear that if the girl truly was youngest daughter of the Yagal clan, that screams Yagal Yohei. Rage boiled in her veins. Everyone called her the Yegal Witch. Warren's thoughts snapped to her reputation, harsh and unyielding. Yet she'd blasted past the other young talents in the clan and seized the Vice Division leader spot. Warren snapped at his companions to keep their identities buried for now. They couldn't risk how she'd react if she uncovered the truth, and Mount Wudang still held what they had to find. Seeing the sorrow etched on Cheol Ryung's face, Hwarin shot over to him. He sank to one knee until their eyes met and, voice low, asked if he was worried about Baxiol. Cheol Ryung admitted he was. Hwarin reached out, gave his head a sure, reassuring pat, flashed a warm smile, and said, "Don't worry." He swore Baxiol would never be caught, reminding him the cat moved like a streak of lightning. Dukong barreled up to Jungwook and Namwook, a jar of liquor clenched in his hands. He clasped his hands, thanked them sincerely for helping earlier that day, and thrust a bottle of liquor at them as a gift. He'd brewed it himself with fine medicinal herbs. The 2 men's mouths watered at the sight, and Jungwook blurted, "No need," though the eager tremor in his voice gave him away. Dukong murmured modestly that it was nothing and begged them not to refuse. Before he finished, Jungwook and Namwook lunged in and snatched the liquor eagerly from his hands. The elder's eyes widened in surprise as Jungwook hoisted the jar with a delighted grin, kept insisting there really hadn't been any need, and then chugged the liquor, draining the jar in one fearless gulp. He turned without a sound and walked away. Dukong stared as the 2 polished off the drink in an instant, then choked out that they should wait while he sprinted to fetch more. Mobyong roamed the grounds, her eyes snapping wide as she spotted Hwarin and Cheol Ryung squaring off, wooden sticks clenched in their hands. She knew they were sparring. It hit him. The child moved with trained precision. There was no mistaking it. They'd learned martial arts. Cheol Ryung vaulted forward and lashed his staff in a savage arc at Hwarin. Her mind raced over what she'd just seen. Cheol Ryung, still barely a kid, already commanded martial skill. The young clan leader had no choice. He unleashed the azure bamboo sword technique. Facing a mere wooden stick, astonishment surged through her. It was extraordinary, and she reflected that geniuses were said to grow at unimaginable speeds. Warren cracked a soft smile, greeted her, and spoke with calm, unwavering respect. He chirped, "Miss Jagal, good morning." She ground her teeth and snapped coldly, "It's anything but good." Rage blazed in her eyes as she balled her fist and snapped at him, "Just wait. I'll capture that cat with my own hands." Warren's calm smile stayed fixed as he leaned in and fired. "Why aren't you already continuing the search?" Crossing her arms again, Yohei insisted she had duties to attend to and vowed she'd come back later to catch the cat. She spun sharply and strode away, Warren waved and called cheerfully, "Take care!" And Yohei froze mid-step. She snapped her head back at him, eyes razor-sharp, and demanded which sect he belonged to. Warren bowed low and murmured that he hailed from a tiny Henan sect she wouldn't recognize. She whipped her gaze away, huffed softly with clear disdain, and strode off. She stormed off, and Warren watched the raw frustration etched on her face as he desperately prayed he'd never cross paths with her again at the Jai Gal clan. She seethed, convinced he was lying right up to the end. He'd insisted he came from a tiny sect. But the raw, blinding flood of chi he unleashed made it painfully obvious it couldn't be true. Her eyes locked on his companions. Each one radiated lethal strength. She slammed down the order to investigate every facet of him. Find where he came from, trace his family lines, uncover the martial arts he trained in. She demanded every scrap of information, and the guards bowed, answering in unison that they understood. Foirine carved alone through the dense, shadowed forest of the Wudang Mountains. He scoured every shelf and shadow for the elusive tome. After days of relentless searching, not a single clue had surfaced. Doubt gnawed at him. How long could he keep putting it off? Later, he burst back into the clinic where his companions waited and swept them up into a tight huddle. His voice stayed steady, slicing through the chaos as he commanded them to listen. The instant their preparations were complete, they would leave. Hearing that, Youngwook and Namwook shot their arms up in eager stretches. Youngwook declared he'd been itching to move again, and Moby Yong, off to the side, quietly thought it was time to pack their belongings. His face went ashen, ragged breaths ripping from him as he screamed for help. He barreled to Huaren's side, and an alarmed Huaren blurted, "What's wrong?" Tears welled in Cheyul Rayong's eyes as he offered a tiny scrap of blood-stained fur clung to him as he choked out through sobs that Bexiel must be injured. The cat should have been home by now, it wasn't, and he feared it was badly hurt. Waring scrutinized the blood-streaked fur, teeth clenching inwardly as he swallowed the fury simmering inside. It hit him. Yohei's men must have been hunting the cat relentlessly. He pressed the boy for where Bexil's territory might be, and Chil Ryong echoed the name, uncertainty shaking his voice. Huaren snapped, "I mean the exact spot where the boy first met the cat." Chil Ryong snapped a quick nod and declared he knew the spot, not a second of hesitation. Huaren declared they'd go. Chil Ryong snapped his head up, stunned, and demanded, "Do you really mean that?" Warren flashed a grin and vowed that because Bixil was like family to the boy, he'd step in and help. They crashed to the ground in front of a towering wall of stone at the mountain's base. They hurled Bexiol's name from the bottom of the rocky mountain, their cries ricocheting off the stone walls as they shouted it again and again. A moment later, Chil Ryong's eyes locked onto something and he shot Huaren's name into the air. He jabbed a blood-streaked tuft of fur on the ground and bellowed a warning. "Bake sails!" Warren dropped into a crouch, scanning the traces with laser focus. He knew they were close. He cried out for the white cat once more, calming Chil Ryong with the hard truth the signs spelled out. Bexil had been nearby. His eyes drilled into it as he turned to Chil Ryong and declared, "This must be the place." As he pressed, a faint breeze slid against his neck from behind. He warned Chil Ryong that a gap yawned beyond the boulder and snapped for him to step back. It refused to move. He ground his teeth and admitted, seething with frustration, that it wouldn't budge. Rage coiled in his gut. His chi couldn't shift it. Should he fetch Instructor Mo or the Ghost Blades to help? Just then Chil Ryong's eyes snagged on something by the rock. He crouched low and blurted, "There's already a hole." Huaren forced a light laugh to save face, insisting his effort had carved the gap. Cheyul Ryong only shook his head and declared it had always been there. Chil Ryong barked, certain Bexeo had darted through that opening, determination blazing in him. Huaren crouched low and slithered into the tight passage, calling back for Chil Ryong to stay outside. It's too dangerous, he'd check it himself. And Chil Ryong hesitated before giving a reluctant nod. Huaren jammed through the narrow gap, muscles screaming, and burst out on the other side. He snapped to his feet, swept his eyes over the cavern in stunned disbelief, whispering to himself that it yawned far wider than he'd ever imagined. He tore his gaze across the stone walls, stunned that a chamber this vast had been concealed behind a single boulder. Suddenly, his eyes snapped wide, breath catching as he took in the mark carved behind the man, the yin and yang emblem. The shadow stepped into the light, Sage Zhang Sanfeng himself, and a wild surge of triumph tore through him. He'd finally unearthed the hidden resting place of the Taiji Depth, Heaven Tome. Right beside him, his gaze snagged on a familiar figure and he screamed. When his eyes fell on Bexiel sprawled there, his breath snatched away. The cat's white fur streaked with blood. Chil Ryong hovered outside the cave, pacing the small opening like a coiled spring. every nerve taut and his ears straining for the faintest sound. A rustle answered from within, and he blurted, voice trembling, "Baekseol!" Hwoarin met his gaze and gently announced he'd found Baekseol. Cheol Ryung surged forward, shouting the cat's name as relief exploded through him. Cheol Ryung sank to the ground with Baekseol in his arms, tears carving tracks down his cheeks as he whispered, voice splintering, that she was so weak, his soft cries echoing through the clearing, while he clutched the injured cat to his chest. Warren hovered a few paces back, eyes fixed and utterly silent. His fingers clamped like iron around the tome he'd been chasing all along. Hwoarin edged toward Baekseol with the caution of a hunter, sank down beside the cat and let out a soft, chiding whisper. Relief hit him like a wave as he blurted, "Did you know how worried Cheol Ryung had been?" He zeroed in on her, every twitch catalogued. Was she really one of the mythical creatures Jang Sambong had raised? They muttered that they had to race back. Baekseol needed urgent treatment, and he had to return with them. Right then, the shadowy figures seated nearby snapped into motion. They spun and froze. One lone tome sat in the exact spot the figure had just vacated. His eyes snapped wide with recognition, and he roared, "The Taiji Depth Heaven Tome!" That's how he found it. Back outside, Foreign stood under the night and replayed, heartbeat by heartbeat, everything that had just transpired. A jolting truth struck him. If he hadn't come hunting for Baekseol, he'd never have unearthed the tome. Not even his past life self would have lifted a finger to help that child either. He murmured that he'd changed, yet swore he'd push himself to change even more. He swore the Tianzheng clan would surge to become Henan's greatest clan and crush any fate that dared drag it into ruin. Later at the clinic, Baekseol lay wrapped head to toe in bandages, every inch patched. Elder Duke Gong leaned close, examined her with steady hands and announced he'd done everything possible. The wound far less dire than it first seemed, so he vowed the cat would mend quickly as Chilryong ran his fingers through her fur and whispered her name, eyes raw and rimmed red from crying. Warren burst outside to find his whole group already assembled and waiting for him. Mo Beong's face hardened into fury as she snapped, "Do you even realize how long we've been waiting?" Then she tore into him with a scathing tirade. They snapped that he should have at least warned them before storming off alone. Warren cleared his throat, apologized, and, voice shaking, confessed he'd sprinted out the moment he heard the cat was injured. He spun away and declared they'd found the cat. And more importantly, he'd seized what he'd been searching for, then barked, "Time to go!" Mo Beong said they were ready to depart, then leaned in, curiosity burning in her eyes. "What do you mean by obtain? Did you finally find the ginseng we've been chasing?" Warren shook his head, a crooked smirk lighting his face as he shot back that he'd uncovered something far better. Mo Beong scoffed, eyes narrowing. What could possibly be better than ginseng? Warren spun to face her and, voice low and steady like a promise, said he'd found a future. Before they departed, Hwoarin once more stepped up to Elder Dugong and Cheol Ryung, bowed slightly, and thanked Elder Dugong for everything he'd done for them so far. Cheol Ryung's eyes locked on him. Sorrow etched across his face as he choked out, "Are you really leaving?" Pressing it into the boy's hand, he warned that if Cheol Ryung ever needed help or fell into trouble, he must take it to the Tianzong clan in Henan, insisting a day would come when he'd need it, and that he must never lose it, and Cheol Ryung seized it eagerly and vowed to keep it safe. Warren spun away, vowed he'd see them again. But before he could leave, his eyes turned to ice as he barked, demanding to know why Warren was being so kind to them. He spat that they were mere country folk, foraging herbs and nursing the sick. Rage laced his voice as he spat. Why would someone like Warren bother helping people he didn't even know? He admitted that at first he'd been consumed by the scripture buried inside that secret technique. He blurted it out. Cheol Ryung was a mirror of himself. The reply hit Dukong like a punch. He staggered and went mute, words choking in his throat. Cheol Ryung flung his arms skyward and hollered for Hwoarin to visit again. Hwoarin lifted a hand and waved back with a faint smile. They were about to leave when Mo Beong's gaze stabbed at him and she snapped, "You actually gave that boy the Tianzong clan's jade plaque?" Reminding him that something like that isn't handed out on a whim. Hwoarin replied, calm and steady, that he'd soaked up Cheol Ryung's teachings and that the boy's worth dwarfed a single plaque. For a heartbeat, a memory stole into Warren's mind. He'd been drinking that afternoon when a young woman swept up to him, a lively smile lighting her face. She dipped into a polite, graceful bow and announced, "I'm Yunhua." She flashed a dazzling grin, pledged she'd serve him from that moment, then stepped forward and greeted him warmly. "Nice to meet you." Back in the present, the group vaulted onto their horses and thundered off. Mo Beong's eyes snagged on Hwoarin's unusually bright grin. She pressed him on what was keeping that smile glued to his face, and Hwoarin laughed softly, asking if he really looked that way. Jungwook snapped. Are they heading to the Jaegal clan next? Hwarin shook his head and said they'd return home. Mobyong exploded in disbelief. She'd thought they were meeting his fiancé and shouted that they were practically at the Jaegal clan's doorstep, so turning back made no sense. Foirine bristled, snapping that it was far too soon to visit them or to face his fiancé. Jungwook snapped that they should prove to the clan he was healthy now, but Hwarin stood like a rock and insisted they go straight back home. They froze as the copper tang of blood slammed into the air. Faces snapped to stone and they muttered in unison, "It's blood." Mo Byung jabbed a finger in one direction and shouted, "It's coming from that way!" They spurred their mounts into a thundering gallop and burst onto a horrific scene. Rage blackened Warren's face as he damned, in his mind, the martial artists who'd unleashed such slaughter. He demanded, "How can they kill so easily like it's nothing?" Jungwook shot him a frightened look and asked, "What should we do?" Warren's eyes narrowed. His voice turned to ice as he warned them not to get involved in another person's fight and urged them to move on. He launched his horse into a headlong charge, leaving the others frozen in his wake as Mobyong shouted after him, "Young master!" He murmured, barely audible, that he couldn't turn his back on the scene. When Mobyong asked what he meant, his face froze into a mask of ice as he barked that the corpse lay on the ground. Mobyong's shout ripped through the air. A battle was erupting nearby. Warren snapped his hand up and barked for everyone to abandon their horses. They leapt off it and plunged deeper on foot. The ghost blades flexed and rolled their shoulders, bracing for combat. Jungwook clenched his fists with iron resolve, declaring this their second battle after the flying demonic lion and roaring that it was time to fight. Namwook murmured to himself that another battle awaited them. Warren slammed his sword up before him and froze them in their tracks. He snapped for them to hang back and size up the situation before they charged in. Jungwook froze for a beat, then forced out a slow, grudging nod. Acceptance wrenched from him. Concealed in the shadows, they watched the fight erupt before them, and Warren's gaze honed to a blade the instant familiar faces slid into view. His thoughts exploded when he spotted Jagal Yohayen standing right beside her. Firstborn of the Jaegal patriarch Jaegal Book, he brandishes the Jaegal name like a battle banner. Shock slammed into him. He hadn't seen them at all while the events on Wudang Mountain unfolded in the distance. A searing blast of energy hurtled straight at Yohei and Book. He took the blow full on. Blood gushed from his mouth and soaked straight through his robes. Desperation hollowed her face, sweat plastering her skin as she fought to steal each ragged breath. Onlookers watched the scene erupt and instantly snapped their gazes to Mo Byung. Their questions sliced the silence. "Do you recognize the men in white?" She shook her head and confessed she didn't. Warren's thoughts detonated. If their identities stayed hidden, the group was still moving in the shadows. His gaze locked on the horned green snake masks and white garb. Memories snapped into razor-sharp focus. Recognition ripped through him. They were the Green Blood Viper Squad, and memories of the history that would later unfold flooded his mind. A man named Duke Sang snatched a life pill from the legendary Green Blood Viper, rocketed into the Divine Realm, and forged an assassin order under the Viper's sigil that became feared for merciless cruelty and surgical precision. Confusion exploded in Warren. Why strike the Jaegal clan now? He burned with the thought that right now, if he had more information on them. He zeroed in on the fight, his features snapping into a razor-sharp focus. He froze for a heartbeat, then suddenly surged into motion. He tore into himself, calling his choices foolish. He already held the Taiji Depth Heaven Tome and the demonic Poison Stone Flower, had sworn to return home, refine his family's martial arts and change their future. Yet despite every vow, his feet dragged him straight into danger, and he couldn't fathom why. A sickening snap. The man's head flew from his shoulders. In an instant, Hwarin stood before them, sword bared, blood dripping from its edge. The Green Blood Viper Squad's leader stopped dead, shock slamming him rigid for a heartbeat. Yohai's eyes shot wide as she screamed, "Is it really you?" Hwarin spun back, locked eyes on them, and announced in a razor-sharp voice that he was Yong Hwarin of the Tianzong clan. The Green Viper Squad leader bared his teeth and snarled, commanding his men to kill him. Mo Byung, Jungwook, and Namwook lunged forward, throwing themselves in front of Hwarin and stopping the strike dead. Jaegal Buke gaped at Hwarin, disbelief burning in his eyes as he blurted, "Is that really you? I thought you were too sick to even move. It's been ages since we met." Warren cut him off with a hard snap, snarling, "This isn't the time for conversation." Buick clamped down on his tongue, dumbstruck by how Warren had remade himself in just a year. The Green Viper Squad leader cocked his head, curiosity burning in his gaze, and snapped, "Who are you, Warren? Really?" Warren leveled his sword and snapped that they were just travelers who'd happened to pass by. He sneered that it didn't matter. All of them were going to die here anyway. Warren's mind snapped into action. He knew a head-on clash would shred them, even though the enemy lacked overwhelming numbers. The Jaegals lay exhausted, too beaten to fight. He clenched his jaw and vowed one thing: get everyone out alive. Mobyong surged forward, voice blazing as she declared, "I'll fight!" The squad leader sneered, taunting her. "So you're brave only when you can hide behind someone else?" He shoved Mobyong behind him, roared at the masked man, demanded to know when he'd ever hidden, and bellowed that he'd fight. Hwoarang rocketed forward with a savage roar, steamrolling past Mobyong's desperate cries to stop. She screamed after him, panic clawing at her throat, and Namwook clamped his hand on her shoulder, shaking his head. He barked, "Wait and watch!" and snapped that the young master they once knew was gone. Rage tore through Hwoarang as he roared he'd kill the enemy with a single thunderous strike. Namwook let out a small, defeated sigh under his breath and muttered, "Maybe not." The Green Viper squad leader licked his lips, a cruel grin carving his face as he readied himself. When Hwoarang's strike came, he parried it like swatting a fly and sneered at him. Was that all it took to shatter his composure? Hwoarang ground his teeth and barreled forward, unleashing blow after blow. The leader bellowed at him, demanding to know what he was plotting, but as he shifted, his blade tore through the leader's hand, shearing one finger clean off. The Green Viper squad erupted into panicked screams, frantically calling for their leader. Hwoarang's allies staggered, gasps ripping out as they stared at the impossible he'd just pulled off. Hwoarang's jaw snapped shut like a trap, as he admitted to himself he'd intended to sever the entire arm. Even with his sight obstructed, the enemy contorted his body and blunted the blow. Despite that, Hwoarang grinned, a rush of triumph hitting him as he realized he'd finally seized the goal he'd been chasing. Mobyong lunged again to stop him, screaming, "It's too dangerous!" Jungwook lunged forward, cutting her off and demanding they let Hwoarang continue. Mobyong wavered, but week after week she insisted she still couldn't stand by. Hwoarang crept forward toward the squad leader, each slow step deliberate, as an icy calm settled over his mind. Hwoarang hammered the words into his chest like a battle mantra, forcing his thoughts into razor-sharp focus. He had to forge a plan to get everyone out alive. Against the future's most notorious assassination organization, strength alone wouldn't save them. He needed razor-sharp cunning, not an instant victory, but one fleeting advantage. And from that moment, every move became a high-stakes gamble. The squad leader's glare snapped to him, their eyes locking in a tense, breathless stare that stretched on. Then, Hwoarang drove his voice straight into the man's mind. He commanded him to deliver a message to squad leader Dokasang. The masked leader froze, his eyes snapping wide as the realization slammed into him. The words were ringing inside his own head. Hwoarang kept his cool and dropped the bomb. He was from the hidden saint cult, too. At the back, Jungwook narrowed his eyes at Hwoarang and hissed that the young master was mouthing something. He couldn't catch the words, just a ripple of noise, so he guessed it was a special technique. Mobyong, eyes glued to Hwoarang, murmured that it was the sound transmission technique. Shock seared through her. This wasn't a skill you mastered overnight, so when had Hwoarang learned it? Hwoarang kept channeling through the technique straight into the Green Viper squad leader, declaring that if the man took the message to Duke Sang, he would be forgiven, and snapping at the masked leader to leave now. The Green Viper squad leader gnashed his teeth, frustration snapping like a taut wire through him. He barked, demanding to know how Hwoarang had learned the squad leader's name. His voice cut like a blade as he asked again, "Who are you really, Hwoarang?" Tension snaked through Hwoarang as bitter fury flared. He'd spilled Dokasang's name, and the leader still doubted him. He'd stood amid the wreckage as the three demonic heavens wiped out the hidden saint cult, then snapped, demanding whether the Green Viper squad was one of the factions trying to resurrect it. He thundered that he too was a man of the hidden saint cult. At the back, his companions erupted into frantic shouts, bellowing for their young master. He jeered at Hwoarang, sneering the boy was nothing but a child, barely grown. Yet the kid rattled off the squad leader's name and the hidden saint cult's secrets, and the masked man admitted he could hardly believe it. He leaned in, eyes razor-sharp, and declared he'd accept Hwoarang's claim. Only if Hwoarang could answer one single question. He roared, "Which heaven of the hidden saint cult do I belong to?" Hwoarang froze. A bolt of clarity struck him. He was being tested, exactly as the future he'd seen had warned. The hidden saint cult wasn't a single unified force. It was a loose alliance stitched together from three distinct factions. The hidden saint cult planted itself between the two as mediator, and tension snapped tight because no one knew which faction the Green Blood Viper squad swore allegiance to. He dismissed the idea that the hidden saint cult or the moon saint cult would set up an assassin network, but a slim, cold chance still gnawed at him. Of course the sun saint cult pulled that. It was exactly the move you'd expect from them. A cold truth hit him. This was a gamble, and yet he'd always backed the likeliest winner. Silence hung like a held breath. Then Farin's lips curled into a faint smile. They locked eyes, the silence between them crackling. Then, finally, the Green Viper squad leader unsheathed his blade and, in a heartbeat, the entire squad melted into the shadows. Crimson seeped from his nose and mouth. He ground out a curse as the cold certainty of an internal injury settled in. Mo Byung barreled toward him as darkness crawled up his throat and consciousness began to slip away. Jagal Yohai stood frozen. The moment his eyes landed on her, he whispered her name. The clan's healing medicine could stitch up his internal injuries, and Warren scowled, snapping that he hadn't helped her, expecting anything in return. Yohai whirled on him and snapped, "Will you only accept it if I beg?" Then thrusted at him and demanded he take it without waiting for an answer. From afar, her voice slid into a whisper as she muttered a. He blurted, stunned. He'd never guessed Yohei hid this utterly cute side. Mo Byung suddenly loomed behind him, leaning in with sharp, curious eyes fixed on the medicine. She snarled that the remedy was a rare relic reserved strictly for the Jagal clan's direct lineage, and admitted she never expected Yohei to hand it to him. Those inside snapped that she should have announced herself. She jolted him. Mo Byung shrugged off the protests and ripped into him, confessing she'd been terrified when he barreled at the assassin, convinced he'd lost his mind. Warren shot back. "I was only trying to save everyone!" She leaned into his back, her hand settling on his shoulder as her voice went soft, and she asked, "Why did you change so much?" He seethed at the world and himself, dragging through each day like it was hell. That was the Warren she had known. Pride flooded her voice and awe shimmered in her eyes, but curiosity burned. She had to know what was propelling him to act this way. He swore he was pouring his whole self into it, solely so he wouldn't drown in regret later. The next morning, Warren's group surged out, shoulder to shoulder with the Jagal clan. They pushed their mounts forward, cutting a steady path down the road. Jagalbuk spun to Warren, gratitude blazing in his eyes, and thanked him for deciding to accompany them back to their clan. Buick owned up. Their family had no fighters. If the assassins struck again, the clan would be left defenseless and teetering on the edge of ruin. Warren shrugged, cool as ice, and said it was no problem. He'd planned to head to the Jagal clan all along. Book nodded, then, with a casual grin, let slip that Warren must be on his way to meet them. Yohai leaned out, her voice a blade of curiosity as she snapped, "What does Fueren like so much about Chongyong?" Her mocking gaze drilled into him, daring him to answer. Fueren clenched his jaw and refused to bite. He yanked the conversation back and slammed a question at Buick. Why had the assassins gone after the Jaguel clan? Buick and Yohaya froze, uneased, twisting their faces as they shot nervous glances at each other. Guerin slammed the point home, declaring the Jagal clan one of the region's fiercest powers, this territory practically their front yard, and demanded to know what could possibly drive assassins to cross half the world just to strike here. Yohei faltered, his reply crumbling into a weak mumble, and she stammered, forcing out that it had to be nothing but a coincidence. Buick shook his head, cutting her off, snapping that it wasn't a coincidence. Warren had risked his life to save them, and Buick insisted he deserved to know the truth. He admitted he couldn't name the exact motive, only that the assassins had been trying to snatch someone away. "Yohei?" Horan scowled and threw the words back like a challenge. Stunned silence hit them. The lady of the Jagal clan herself had been the target. Book stepped forward and ripped the truth wide open. The assassins butchered their warriors without hesitation, but made a point of sparing Yohai. He insisted a shadowy force nursed a deadly grudge against their family. Warren's voice cut through the silence. If kidnapping Yohai was the goal, then they took her as a bargaining chip. Whoever pulled this wants something in return. Grimness flooded his mind. He couldn't deny he'd already suspected an enemy was gunning for their clan. A razor-sharp suspicion sliced through him. Were the martial artist's attacks fueled by a leak of sensitive information? At last the group surged into the territory. His heart hammered at the reunion that awaited him. After an unbearably long time, he was finally about to see Chung Young again. His dear Chung Young. Memories from his previous life slammed back. They'd been promised to each other before either of them was even born, but the years had shoved their lives apart. She dove headfirst into martial arts, her focus razor-sharp and relentless. By the end, they were nothing but distant silhouettes, shackled by duty. A voice bellowed his name, summoning the young clan heir to stride forward and greet the clan head. Warren gave a sharp nod, turned to his companions, and commanded them to rest as he charged ahead. He straightened, voice ringing as he began a formal proclamation. "I am Yong Hwarin of the Tianzong clan." Before he could finish, the clan head shot up from his seat and clamped both hands onto Warren's shoulders. He erupted into booming laughter, his voice rolling through the chamber as he declared it unbelievable to see Hwarin so healthy. the exact opposite of their last meeting. This man stood like a storm, the Jagal clan's head, hailed as the heaven-ruling sword, Jagal Kayok. Hwarin dropped into a respectful bow and declared, "It's been far too long," and Chayok nodded before asking, steady and direct, if the Tianzhuang clan leader was well. Hwarin shot back that his father was in fine health and had just sent his regards as they spoke. Chayok's hawk-like gaze raked Hwarin's body. He chuckled, eyes on the hard, trained muscles, clear proof he'd been drilled in martial arts. Hwarin cleared his throat in a fumbling scrape and blurted that he wasn't worthy of that praise. Chayok flicked the words aside and snapped that he'd already eaten up too much of Hwarin's time. Shame slammed into him. He couldn't keep stalling while someone stood there, breathless with eager hope. Chayok dropped one more bomb. Another guest had slipped in earlier, someone uncannily similar. He was about Hwarin's age. Chayok pushed for them to talk, and Hwarin vowed he would. The moment Hwarin slipped out, the room's mood snapped into something different. Alone with Book, Jagal Chayok's laughter died, swallowed by a razor-edged silence. His voice hardened into steel as he snapped at Book to speak. Outside, Hwarin barreled down the estate steps. Mind razor focused on the meeting ahead, he steeled himself with the thought that he'd already greeted the clan head. The attendant barked that the clan's members weren't here. The guest snapped back that he only wanted to announce his name. Hwarin snapped his head around, eyes slitting with recognition. He knew the man the instant he saw him. With a mocking grin, he sneered at him, branded the man before him the heir of the Tianzong clan, and proclaimed himself Jiuguang of the Songchun clan. He thrust his hand out. Hwarin froze, hesitation keeping him from taking it at once. He zeroed in on the hand, his tongue clicking in sharp irritation as recognition slammed home. This was the guest Jagal Chayok had mentioned, and then he spoke. Jiuguang smirked, taunting Hwarin. "You here to see Lady Chongyang? I arrived first. This meeting's mine." Finally, his grip locked like steel, unyielding. A polite smile curled on his lips but never reached his eyes as he said, "It was a pleasure to meet him." Then added that he'd heard many things about the Songchun clan. Still clutching the man's hand like an iron vice, Hwarin announced in an icy voice that he'd come for the woman promised to him as his fiancée before he was even born. Admitted he hadn't expected to find Zhou Guang here, and watched Zhou Guang stagger under the brutal pressure of the handshake. He smothered the reaction with a quick smirk and said he'd heard Hwarin's health had been failing in recent years. At that moment, Jagal Buick burst in and the tension hit him like a lightning strike. He snapped at the two men. "Here to see Chongyang?" Then jabbed a finger at the courtyard and declared she was most likely out there. Hwarin and Zhao Guang bellowed the word in unison, determination blazing in their voices. They barreled forward, each vying to outpace the other as they closed in. Their strikes screamed toward Zhu Guang. Inches away, both men slammed to a halt. In the courtyard, Chongyang towered, blade pinned to her sparring partner's throat as the defeated opponent threw up his hands, voice trembling as he choked out his surrender. Chongyang flicked her blade free in a heartbeat, then slid it back into its sheath with breezy, effortless calm. Her voice stayed calm, a cold slash of disappointment cutting through it, as she muttered that the fight had been boring. Hwarin's memories slammed him back to that first heartbeat when his eyes locked on Chongyang. She swept back into their territory triumphant. The air exploded with deafening cheers as the crowd hurled her title skyward, voices crashing over each other in a thunderous chant. "Listen, the Snowblossom Blade of the 12. Martial Blossom stormed back, the demonic human's head skewered on its edge. A man in the crowd roared in stunned disbelief, demanding how the Jagal clan could have produced a martial artist like her. Another snapped that he'd heard she was consumed by an obsession with the art, and the name tore through the masses like wildfire until someone finally shouted it aloud. His fragile frame sagged, every shallow breath laying bare the failing health eating him away. Young Yong snapped her head around, and for a single heartbeat their gazes locked. Hwarin's thoughts raced through every hard-won achievement. She seized the title Snowblossom Blade, and by 40 she had carved herself into one of the 3 fiercest female martial artists. A thunderous shout ripped him from his reverie as Zhu Guang barreled toward Chongyang, screaming her name. He called out, feigning easy familiarity. "It's been a while." Chongyang leveled a cold, unamused stare at Kurt Li and demanded, "Why do you keep coming to our clan so often?" Zhou Guang laughed, nerves skittering, insisting he only wanted to see her. But Chongyang cut him dead, snapping "Stop," and coldly declaring she already had a fiancé. Surprise and uncertainty warred in her voice. She crept forward, heart hammering, and whispered, "Is it really you?" Hwarin answered with calm composure, saying, "It's been a long time." Young leaned in, studying him intently, her voice softening as she asked how he could even be standing before her. Hwarin said he'd only just recovered and was now trekking across the land, then admitted he'd stopped by for one reason only, to see her. Young fired the question. Would he be staying for several days? And Hwarin hesitated. He riveted his gaze on her for a long beat, then answered with a faint smile. He snapped no, and insisted he'd be gone at dawn. He'd come only to see her. He spun on his heel, voice low and urgent. They'd talk after her training the next day. He had something he needed to tell her. Young's gaze clung to his retreating form, her face a locked, unreadable mask. Jealousy flared across Guang's face, and anger cracked his jaw. His fist tightened like a vice as the storm inside him clawed to break free. Hwarin sat absorbed in a stack of books, lost in the pages, when the silence snapped and a visitor arrived. He snapped. Did Guang come here to say something? He blurted that he loved Young. Hwarin met him with an icy stare and coolly called the confession a bold move. Guang slammed the question down. Did Hwarin really mean to marry her? Hwarin snapped, his voice razor-sharp as he accused Guang of having no manners. Guang snorted, barreling on as irritation sharpened every word. He scoffed that Young's fierce love of martial arts drove him to hunt for strength in a partner. Guang boasted he'd already carved out a name for himself over the past few years. They were crowned the Azure Cloud Dragonblade. He roared. What did Hwarin pull off? Insisting he'd only just barely recovered. Leaning forward, Guang's sneer sharpened as he snarled that Hwarin had never truly loved Young. Rage surged through Guang, but in a heartbeat he smoothed his features into a calm, practiced mask. Out of sight, his hand clenched a tiny vial whose murky gleam screamed poison. He sprang to his feet, voice like ice as he barked, "Hwarin will regret this," then fell utterly silent. Alone again, Hwarin clicked his tongue, irritation flaring. Guang's eyes told him the man would soon spark trouble. His gaze snapped to the Taiji Depth Heaven tome lying before him, and he hissed that he'd have to use it sooner than he'd originally planned. Before long. Waring spun to the door, ready to rip into whoever had barged in, then froze cold when he recognized who stood there. It was Yohei. The name struck her, and she whispered, "Have I disturbed your rest?" Inwardly, Warren's jaw tightened. She looked every inch a proper lady now, far more refined than the woman he'd last seen, and the change struck him as peculiar. She was worlds apart from the mischievous girl he'd met on Mount Wudang. He demanded why she was out so late, and she revealed she'd heard he'd be leaving at dawn. Hwarin snapped that staying longer could derail Young's training, and urgent matters at home were pulling him away. Yochai nodded, understanding flashing across her face. Then, in an instant, her demeanor snapped into something cold and unreadable. She leaned in and taunted, "You're really going to marry my sister?" Warren's annoyance bristled, but he kept silent. He forced a quiet, bitter sigh, baffled that so many people were prying into his marriage. Joggle Book, Young, and Yohai waited at the front to see them off, and Book asked, "Hwarin, do you really have to leave so soon?" Hwarin declared he'd already paid his respects to the clan head, and met Young, so he bowed out. Buick quipped that Young would surely be disappointed. Young dropped her gaze as a shadow of sadness settled over her face. Hwarin's gentle call sliced through the air, asking to speak privately before she could answer. A thunderous shout tore across the distance. An urgent voice bellowed his title. "Heir of the Yong clan." He roared, "I am Guang, the Azure Cloud Dragonblade of the Song Chun clan." He stormed forward and slammed down a formal challenge, demanding a duel with the Tianzong clan's heir. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd as Guang strode forward and hurled down his challenge for all to hear. The arena exploded with sound as the crowd roared, some screaming in stunned disbelief at the duel's brazen audacity. Young's voice sliced through the chaos, sharp and cold, as she declared he truly had no shame. Her eyes locked on him in disappointed accusation for daring to challenge someone who had only just recovered from serious injuries, and she demanded that if he wanted to fight he behave properly and set a date in advance. Mocking laughter burst from him as he sneered there was no shame in challenging the martial clan's heir. Then he roared for all to hear that he only wanted to witness the Tianzong clan's famed soaring dragon emperor sword. With Warren preparing to leave, he had to act now or risk never getting another chance. Arrogance burned in his eyes as he fired the question. Would Warren accept? Warren's gaze snapped sharp. He smelled the trap. Guang wasn't there to test swords. He was there to humiliate him in front of everyone. His companions Jung Wook, Nam Wook, and Mo Beong stood nearby, not a shred of worry on their faces, only eager certainty, as if they'd already seen what Foreign was capable of. Young Wook's eyes burned with expectation. It was time for Hwoaran to reveal the sword he'd had repaired. He leveled his stare at Mo Beong and snapped, "You're his instructor. Aren't you going to stop him?" Mo Beong shrugged it off, sounding casual, and at first urged him to decline. The battle with the assassins had left him too battered to face another fight. Her expression shifted into a knowing smile as she confessed she'd already guessed he'd accept the duel. He always hurled himself into danger for the Tianzong clan, intentions pure. A clan member herself, she vowed to follow him down whatever path he chose, conviction blazing in her chest. She told young Hwoaran she believed in him and urged him to accept and win. Her words slammed into Hwoaran, leaving him stunned for a moment. Had she for the first time in a long while truly transformed? Young Hwoaran, heir of the Tianzong Yong clan, steeled himself and accepted the duel. Jiaoguang and Hwoaran squared off at the center. Jegal Byuk, Yohai, and Chongyong planted between them as stern overseers, and Yohai boomed the rules with solemn authority. Chi is allowed, but sword chi and lethal techniques are forbidden, and defeat comes the moment a combatant drops their weapon or their sword shatters. If Chi's torrent ripped a blade apart, that shattered weapon counted as defeat. Zhou Guang flashed a confident grin, burying his true thoughts behind calm eyes. He already knew this would hand him the edge. Internal injuries ravaged Hwoaran, choking off his chi and crippling his ability to manipulate it. Juguang's grin snapped into place as he vowed to savor every second and toy with him before the duel even began. The loser would be banished from the Jegal clan, barred from its gates forever. Zhou Guang sneered, snatched the challenge in a heartbeat, then jeered at Hwoaran, reminding him that if he lost, he'd be the one barred from ever returning. Hwoaran's calm reply cut through the room. The wager had to be honored. Yohai's eyes snapped wide at the twist, and behind that stunned blink her mind raced, mapping every dangerous implication. If Hwoaran won, they'd banish Jiaoguang for good. He'd never set foot in the clan again. If Hwoaran lost, it wouldn't matter. He'd end up living with Young anyway. And Yohei was stunned that someone could hatch that plan in a single heartbeat. Buick shook his head and declared with iron certainty that the Yong clan would lose. Yohai gaped and demanded why, and Buick replied that, though Hwoaran's had a brilliant future, his injuries had sapped his strength. Jiaoguang, rough around the edges, bristled with years of hard-won hands-on experience. They called him the Azure Cloud Dragon Blade. Every swing of his blade roared like a dragon, and his chi flowed like drifting blue clouds. Buick roared that his skills already rivaled the elite rookies of the Great Sex. If they clashed this instant, Hwoaran would stand no chance. Buick whirled to Chongyong and asked, "Do you agree?" At the arena's center, Jiaoguang smirked, confidence blazing, and thundered, "Jiaoguang, Azure Cloud Dragon Sword of the Songchun clan." Hwoaran met the silence with razor calm and announced himself, Yong Hwoaran of the Tianzong Yong clan. He sneered, spitting that the Tianzong had no right to call themselves the Dragon Clan. They were nothing but worms now. Hwoaran's face snapped into iron. With a quiet, burning resolve, he vowed he'd make him see why. Somehow they blurred through the onslaught, slipping past each blow and snapping every strike aside. They lunged forward, roaring again, and taunted him. "Let's have some fun!" Rage curled in his throat as he cursed silently. How was Hwoaran blocking his techniques? Blood and pain screamed through him, stealing his focus. He couldn't follow the trajectories. Juguang's sword snapped into razor focus. Insight had awakened as chi seeped into his vision. He bit down hard, forced to admit he shouldn't have gotten this far yet. Was this too? He snapped Hwoaran's name in a rat-quick blur, then readied another strike. He roared, "This time I'll see if Hwoaran can block." Blue chi detonated from his sword as he unleashed another devastating technique. Yohei's shout ripped through the air as he locked eyes on the mighty Azure Cloud Sword. Hwoaran watched closely, concern igniting in his eyes. So this was the Songchun clan's sword. Jiaoguang's smirk turned razor-sharp as he snapped at Hwoaran to unleash everything he'd got. Juguang thundered the heavens to summon the mighty Azure Cloud Sword, and Hwoaran roared as he conjured the soaring Dragon Emperor Sword. Their blades slammed together in a thunderous crash, sending sparks of chi raining through the arena. He sneered, snapping, "Is this really all the Tianzheng clan's sword can do?" Juguang spotted the opening, bellowed, "This ends now!" and unleashed his secret technique, the Severing Sphere. His body bore a ragged map of wounds, blood dripping from his arms. His companions and the Jago siblings stared, worry carved into their faces. Hwoaran's eyes radiated an eerie calm while blood slipped from his lips. Eyes wide in disbelief, a bitter curse churned in his gut. He'd planned to rip at least one of Hwoaran's arms away, but Hwoaran actually blocked the clan's secret technique. He cinched the cloth tight around his arm and the sword's hilt, anchoring himself to the blade for support. He hoisted his weapon again, snarling that it wasn't over. then leveled his blade at Zhou Wang and dared him to step forward. Rage exploded from Zhu Guang as he spat out the confession. He'd never liked Huaren. Rage boiled in him at the man's haughty air, icy calm and smug know-it-all certainty. At first now it was personal. Rage boiled in him as he bellowed he wanted nothing but to crush him. His aura detonated, roaring outward like a bloodthirsty storm drenched in killing intent. From the side, Yohei screamed in protest, declaring it was no longer a friendly duel and spinning toward her brother, desperation clawing at her voice. She begged Buick to halt the match before it spiraled out of control. Buick keeps silent, jaw clenched and unmoving. Desperation clawed at his throat as Yohei whirled to Chongyang and begged her to step in. He'd been lying to himself, wearing a calm mask as death closed in, pretending to know the future when it was anything but certain. Guilt hit him like a punch. He wasn't a saint. He'd ripped away a child's future. He refused to run from his pathetic past anymore. Not a saint. He swore to move heaven and earth to help whoever he could still protect. He gripped his sword as Qi roared, surging thickly around the blade, and vowed to himself this would be the path he walked from now on. Zhu Guang wavered for a single heartbeat, staggered by the raw, roaring presence pouring off him. Rage ripped from his throat as he roared, demanding to know what nonsense Huaren was spouting. Huaren hefted his blade with iron resolve, his voice slicing across the arena, calm, resolute, as he vowed to Jiao Guang he'd prove why the Yang clan are the clan of dragons, and their clash ignited into something fiercer than before. A crushing pressure slammed the arena, leaving the crowd trembling, and Yohei roared a warning that this wasn't a friendly spar anymore. He demanded it be stopped. A strange crackling energy surged from the very center of the duel. Silence slammed over the crowd. The entire audience froze in shock. Yohei stammered, "What is that?" Then dropped into a breathless whisper. "It looks like a dragon." Panic ripped across his face as he realized Huaren was siphoning his energy and surging with power. Panic ripped through his mind as he spat curses at the situation, knowing that at this pace he'd surely lose. Just as the air hit its breaking point, a thunderous voice tore through the arena, bellowing for them to stop. A figure materialized in the arena's center, snatching both energies into his palms with a single sweeping motion, and scattering them to nothing in an instant. He brushed the chi aside like dust, then revealed himself, Jagal Chayuk. The Jagal siblings dropped to their knees and cried in unison, "My lord!" Jagal Chayok's voice snapped like steel. He warned that if the fight had gone on, someone would have truly died. He gnashed his teeth and unleashed a booming roar straight at the clan head. He exploded, insisting he'd won the duel and screaming that Chiak's interference had stolen his victory. Jagal Chiok pinned him with an icy stare and challenged him. Did he truly believe that? He reminded him that, according to the rules, a shattered or dropped sword spelled instant defeat, and Zhou Wang's eyes snapped wide as he stared. He crashed down in horror, clawing at his throat, realized his blade was snapped clean in half. Color drained from his face as he choked out a trembling denial. Then he scrambled for an excuse, accusing Huaren of sorcery to justify himself. He swore he'd felt it in his bones. Huaren was gravely injured and couldn't summon a shred of his power. Unnatural strength exploded through him, and Jiao Guang roared that it had to be demonic arts. His tirade died mid-sentence as Chongyang stepped forward, every movement ice-cold and surgical. She hoisted her sword and pinned its tip to Jiao Guang's neck. She snapped, "Stop making a scene and leave it at once," reminded him of the wager he'd agreed to, and hissed, "Have you already forgotten it?" They slunk away humiliated. Jagal Choyok clicked his tongue in disappointment and sneered that the Song Chun clan had truly fallen, questioning how someone like Jaok Wang could ever claim to be the Yang clan heir. His gaze snapped to Huaren, and a wide smile split his face. He threw back his head in a thunderous laugh, showered praise on the Yang clan's young master, declaring the duel splendid, and that he was genuinely shocked by his performance. He clapped a hand onto Huaren's shoulder and grinned. Despite still recovering, Huaren had unleashed jaw-dropping martial prowess. His gaze snapped narrow. He declared the raw display of power left him no choice but to step in, and he snarled that no duel inside the Jagal clan could be allowed to end with a corpse. Huaren's faint smile curled as she dipped into a respectful bow, thanking him for the acknowledgement, and Jigal Chuk erupted into loud, raucous laughter. Jagal Chuk clicked his tongue and barked a scolding, demanding whether he truly meant to leave in that state, then urged Huaren to spend the night in the main estate and depart at dawn. He shoved the moment at him, use it to finally have a real heart-to-heart with Chongyang. Furin sank into another crisp, respectful bow and accepted, his reply barely a whisper. Jigal Chuk zeroed in on him, eyes glittering with hungry curiosity. A cold certainty gripped him. The Tianzong clan truly harbored a dragon among their ranks. Oh clenched his throat. He couldn't deny they'd earned the name Dragon Clan. He spotted the wound, blood pouring from it, and the memory hit him with brutal clarity. His eyes narrowed to razor slits as a silent question gnawed at him. Could it be? After a long, loaded pause, his quiet contemplation snapped into a booming laugh that rolled across the courtyard. He bellowed for Buick, snapping that they had to pull their plans forward and move faster than anyone expected. Book dropped into a sharp bow and snapped, "It will be done as you command." Warren snapped himself together, straightened his suit, and beckoned the visitor inside. Chung Young glided in like silk, cool and composed, every step radiating quiet, effortless elegance. Chung Young swept into Huaren's quarters and settled across from him with the calm, coiled grace of a blade. He eyed it, flashed a faint smile, owned up to going a little overboard in the duel, and reassured her he was fine. Silence slammed between them, stretching taut until They finally strained to speak. At that exact heartbeat, Chung Young cut through the hush with his voice. Chung Young's jaw clenched as he admitted Joke Wang had not been an easy opponent. Warren gaped in surprise as she leaned forward and unfolded the rest in vivid, hard-hitting detail. She warned the Songchun clan's Azure Cloud Sword was a brutal art that ripped enemies apart with overwhelming chi, and Zhu Guang's martial prowess was undeniably fierce. She pressed on, calling out the exact technique Warren had unleashed at the end. At first glance it wore the shape of the soaring dragon emperor sword, yet something about it screamed that it wasn't the same. She confessed, voice trembling, that she'd watched him siphon his opponent's energy, bit by bit. A jolt ran through her. Could he have secretly trained in the Wudang sect's martial arts? Barely out of recovery, he hammered his body through relentless training and surged to that level. He realized, deep inside, that Chung Young's obsession with martial arts still burned like wildfire. And he let a quiet, inward sigh slip out. He'd been expecting this exact line of questioning from her. Chung Young snapped back to herself and blurted, "Did I just say too much?" Warren swallowed, conceded she was right, then squared his shoulders and announced he had something important to tell her. He revealed that once he'd recovered, he threw himself back into grueling martial arts training. At last the goal snapped into focus, or so he insisted, saying it had burned in his chest all along. He thrust his right hand skyward and declared a burning desire to protect his clan and family. He swore he'd move heaven and earth to make it happen. A grin split his face as he turned to face her. Chung Young cocked her head, bewilderment flashing across her face as she asked, "What do you mean?" Foreen locked his gaze on her, voice steady as a blade. "You'll become an exceptional martial artist, and I won't stand in your way." Ice slid across her face and she snapped, "Is there another woman?" Warren spluttered, scrambling to deny it. The truth was brutal and simple. They didn't love each other. He burned to see her live the life she truly craved, untethered by any duty that could shackle her pursuit. Warren gaped in stunned disbelief, his voice snapping as he demanded to know what her wish was. Later that night, under the moon's cold silver glow, Huaren and Chung Young stood together in the training court, summoned there by Chung Young's request. Warren raked his fingers through his hair, disbelief crackling in his voice as he asked if her wish had truly been to duel him. Chung Young's eyes blazed as she snapped that he should know the truth inside and out. She taught him that when blades collide you can read the other's mind. Crossed steel lays bare their thoughts and the words they won't say. She declared her answer with iron, sank into a fighting stance with her sword leveled. Warren's lips curled into a small smile as he lifted his weapon and mirrored her stance and without hesitation vowed to grant her wish. In the next instant, they hurtled at each other, steel screaming as their blades crashed together beneath the cold moonlight. Steel screamed through the courtyard as they traded blows, the clash of blades ripping the air. Swords in hand, smiles spread across both their faces as they reveled in the duel. Wordless laughter threading through every clash, their strikes a private conversation. A final thought roared through him. "Goodbye, Chung Yang." Huaren and his companions planted themselves at the Jegal clan grounds exit. He shot back a smile, a wordless farewell that hung in the air. Back at the training courtyard, the swords they'd used in their spar still plunged blade first into the earth, silent trophies of the clash. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silently drenched in the sun's molten gold rays. Finally, the group crashed into the inn and flopped down, lounging at last. Every now and then a laugh tore through the clatter of clinking cups. Jungwook leaned in, eyes blazing with curiosity, and pressed Warren. "When did you even find the time to train this much?" Namwook burst out, demanding to know what those strange techniques were during the duel, and Jungwook insisted the final strike was undeniably the soaring dragon emperor sword, yet it moved with an unfamiliar rhythm that didn't match the art they knew. Foirine chuckled, reminding them he'd been at their side the whole time, then shot back. "How could I possibly have trained alone?" Inside, his thoughts screamed a completely different story. Silence tightened as he swallowed the truth. The blade he'd used was the soaring dragon emperor sword. Just as his chi ran dry, the Taiji Depth Heaven Arts crashed in and choked off his power. The soaring dragon emperor's sword was forged to batter opponents with raw force as a roaring blue dragon, but fused with the Taiji Depth Heaven Arts, it morphed into a chi-devouring technique that siphoned an opponent's energy to crush them, and he reflected. The Jagal clan had halted it at the last heartbeat. If only his mastery of the Taiji Depth Heaven Arts had been stronger. It could have drained the clan head's very chi, erupting into a runaway power no one could cage. When Youngwook hoisted his cup like a trophy, a satisfied grin blazing on his face, he proclaimed that this duel had awakened Hwarin, blasting his martial arts understanding into thrilling new depths. At his side, Mobi-Young fell silent, her gaze locked onto Hwarin. She dared to imagine, could that greatness really return? She strode up to the group and snapped that they must work harder, or they'd be left behind by their young clan leader. Youngwook jumped in, slammed his hand on the table, and bellowed that no one could have imagined this turn of events just a few weeks ago. No one believed their young clan leader would obliterate the flying demonic blood one to seize the special flower. He scoffed that no one could topple the Azure Cloud swordsman, his voice booming with pride as he proclaimed Hwarin grew stronger with each passing day. Laughter burst from every throat around the table, flooding the inn with an infectious, spreading warmth. On the inn's upper floor, a cloaked figure loomed at the window, motionless as a statue, his gaze drilling into the lively group below. Inside, a man hunched over a table, flanked by cloaked sentinels, as the newcomer strode forward, dropped into a crisp bow, and barked that he had urgent news. Seated at the table, the man hissed under his breath, his voice warped and heavy with obsession as he muttered about witchery and sorcery. His bare fingers clawed at the table until they bled, carving fresh gouges into the wood. His face contorted and he roared, insisting once more that it was sorcery. The next day, Warren and his companions tore through the forest on horseback, hooves pounding the narrow path. Someone barked a warning. Keep forcing the pace and the horse will keel over from exhaustion long before they reach the clan. He spun back, apology in his eyes, admitting he'd been overeager. Mobi-Young snapped, "Rely on me!" Warren's grin split his face as he nodded and replied with respect. Instructor Mo. He jabbed at the tiny spring nearby, urging them to stop so they could rest and water the horses. Youngwook told the others their young clan leaders were utterly consumed by martial arts these days. Namwook grinned and said it was a good sign, and Mobi-Young warned the phase wouldn't last. Miss this chance, and breaking through the wall of progress later would be far harder. His hand slammed to the sword's hilt and he thundered, "Who's there?" His crew barreled to his side, panic in their eyes, shouting, "What happened?" The crew froze solid, breath stolen by their sudden appearance. Mobi-Young roared, cutting through the room, instantly denying they were mere bandits. Assassins, cold-blooded killers. Jungwook demanded, "Are these the same enemies we fought before?" They didn't feel like assassins. Their presence exuded the cold, rigid certainty of an orthodox sect, and from deeper in the forest a low, hateful voice rasped, repeating itself and crowing that they'd found him, calling him a wrecked demon. He inched into the light, his face finally unmasked. Hwarin's face snapped to stone as recognition slammed into him, and he shouted the man's name. Hwarin ground his teeth as a crushing, hostile energy bore down on him like an iron vice. His gaze sliced across the ring of men surrounding Jukwang. Recognition slammed into him. Azure Cloud, the Song Chen clan. Bitterly he realized and snapped. So they're not even bothering to hide who they are. Hwarin roared across the taut field, demanding to know if Jukwang had come to exact revenge for what had happened at the Jiggle clan. Zhouguang's furious roar shattered the air. He demanded silence. Rage flared in his eyes, locking onto Hwarin as he jabbed a finger at him and bellowed that Hwarin was a practitioner of demonic arts, snarling that others might not sense it but he, the Azure Cloud Dragonblade, could. His voice trembled with iron conviction as he roared, "I've come to slay the demon!" From behind, Mobi-Young caught the deranged glint in Jukwang's eyes and immediately muttered that he wasn't in his right mind. Jukwang's mind unraveled as he jabbed at the bulging veins and pointed to the storm tearing through his inner chi. Seeing the man plunge into chi deviation, Hwarin barked again, reminding Zhou Guang he'd already been beaten once and sneering, "Do you honestly think it'll be different this time?" Jukwang's laugh crawled out slow and hungry, his features warping into madness as a sneer curled his lips. "You still don't understand your situation, do you?" Then a wicked grin split his face and he taunted, "So how did the poisoned spring water taste?" Realization slammed into Warren's group. They reached for their chi and it lay dead, refusing to flow. Mobi-Young's breath hitched and she screamed that her inner chi had stopped flowing. Namwook, right beside her, choked out that his chi had frozen too. Warren's mind careened. Gentleman's poison, he choked, horror surging as he realized he'd poisoned the spring with it. Enraged, Warren slammed his fist and shouted at Jukwang, demanding, "Was poisoning us your plan all along? As if threatening us wasn't enough, you used poison too. You dare call yourself an orthodox martial artist after this?" Rage detonated in Jukwang as he roared, "Shut up! I'd do far worse to slay a demon. You have no idea the blood and nights I poured into this cultivation. I didn't spend my life on martial arts just to lose to scum like you." Rage carved his face as he hoisted the azure cloud sword and bellowed that its might was invincible. At the back, Jungwook's voice quivered with tension as he warned it was dire. They'd all drunk from the poison spring. A dozen armed warriors bore down on them. Zhou Guang was racked by ki deviation, and their enemies meant to kill them all. Hua Rin thought fast. Zhou Guang's chi wavered. We had no chance without our own inner energy. He began to bark out an order. Namwook shot forward and planted a firm hand on his shoulder, declaring they were his guards, and it was their duty to protect him. Mobyong, Namwook, and Jungwook squared off before Hwarin, muscles coiled and eyes blazing, ready to explode into battle. Mobyong tilted her head slightly and barked. "While we hold the enemies off, you must escape. You're not dying before we do. No chance," she shot, conviction crackling in her voice. Hwarin froze, every muscle locking for a heartbeat. His face blackened, then his voice snapped into command. He charged forward, his expression hard as iron. Not today, he thought. And as he slipped past his companions, he vowed no one would die. Panic ripped from her throat as she begged him to stop. Then without warning, he ignored her. Warren's pure chi erupted, roiling through his body like a raging storm. It collapsed into a crushing core, packing tighter until it hurt, then ripped outward in a violent burst that bled a dark crimson as it surged out of control. He mouthed, "I'll make sure of it," a silent vow as he watched the transformation. Blood trickled from Warren's nose as he forced himself onward, stunned to realize he'd just drawn his chi out by sheer force for the very first time. A crushing, domineering energy. The raw weight of 60 years of cultivation. If I lose focus for even a heartbeat, it will swallow me whole. Jukwang, his face twisted with pure hatred, bellowed and hurled his command for all his men to charge. "The Songchun clan will personally purge this demon," he roared, and they surged forward in an instant. From the rear, Mobyong, Namwook, and Jungwook roared a warning, bellowing for their young lord. Warren drew a cold, steadying breath as resolve snapped into place. He knew he had to take them down as fast as possible. He drew his sword in one fluid motion and carved a thunderous slash that cut the first wave of attackers down in an instant. Zhou Guang jabbed his sword at him, screamed again, and barked to the remaining men, "Kill him!" The field detonated into chaos as the fight surged, and Warren ripped through attackers like a storm, cleaving them with ruthless precision. His sword screamed a crimson arc through the air as bodies toppled one by one. He launched himself skyward and tore straight over Jukwang. Blood sluiced from Zhou Guang's mouth as he glared skyward, eyes blazing. His teeth ground together. "He must die!" he screamed, and we lunged forward as one. A crackling halo wrapped Hor in midair. The next instant he vanished. They reappeared on the ground, right inside their formation. The masked men snapped into a single, deadly stance. They bellowed their technique in perfect unison, snapped into a combination attack formation, and spun a unified circular assault that left Hwarin surrounded. A sword lunged from behind, and he snapped his body around at the last instant, the blade missing him by a hair. Jukwang launched himself into the fray, his sword crashing down in a bone-shattering vertical slash, and Hwarin slammed his blade up at the last heartbeat, as metal met metal in a deafening clash. "So this is the young clan you spoke of," Jukwang snarled, slamming his weight down with savage force. "They're fighting tooth and nail to hold back. Damn it, my limbs sink like anchors. Their formation is one problem, but this?" A desperate scream from afar snapped him to attention. "No, Master Mo!" Jungwook's panicked cry split the air as Hwarin whipped his head around and caught Mobyong locked in combat. One of the masked men slammed a brutal blow into her shoulder, sending her reeling backward. He ripped himself free from the duel with Jukwang and barreled toward her, roaring, "Master Mo!" His men lunged at Hwarin without warning. A thunderous crash ripped through the air as the masked men slammed around him, encircling him completely. Pinned and paralyzed, Hwarin stood ringed on every side. No gap, no escape. From above, Jukwang rocketed into the air, sword raised high. "You bastard!" he roared. "This is the end!" A colossal blast of demonic chi detonated from the formation's core, ripping everything outward. A pillar of power blasted into the sky, rattling the entire battlefield as a blinding flare tore through the clouds. Silence slammed over the area as choking dust and smoke swallowed every sound. That was the heavenly lightning ascension, she thought. Even I can barely wield that advanced sword art. How did he manage to pull it off? She spun and shouted to Namwook and Jungwook, who were still fighting to stand. "Two rising ghost blades, you all right?" Namwook groaned, rubbing his head, and Jungwook nodded weakly. "Other than this pounding headache, I'm fine." What on earth was that? They froze as a massive crater yawned before them, and at its center, Hwoarang stood, still wreathed in dark, churning demonic chi. Namwook's voice cracked with disbelief. "The shockwave didn't reach us." Mobyong leaned in, scanned the scene, then gave a slow, decisive nod. The young lord snatched control of it at the last heartbeat. Warren stood rooted in the crater's heart, utterly unmoving. A frantic "Master Mo! Master Mo!" ripped through his mind as his sight smeared and the world around him dissolved. A vast expanse unfurled to the horizon, endless puddles catching and mirroring a pure blue sky. Confusion clawed at him as he slowly scanned his surroundings, then he whispered, "Where is this?" A dawning recognition crept over Horan as he took in an endless spread of mirror-like puddles beneath the wide-open sky, and he whispered, "This is a mind space." Teeth clenched and resolve blazing, he snapped, "I have to go back." Master Mo and the two rising ghost blades still clashed, and he couldn't abandon them. Suddenly the puddle's tranquil surfaces erupted into violent ripples. A demonic aura oozed upward, and in an instant the water ran a deep, sickening red. Warren didn't even have time to react as something yanked him into the crimson depths. Beneath the surface, countless pale hands burst from the dark, clawing for him as he plunged deeper into the void. Outside his mind space, Warren's chi detonated, wild, unstoppable, a savage surge of energy. The earth buckled beneath its raw force. Nearby, Dukong gaped, panic lacing his voice as he shouted, "What's happening?" Mobyong's face went hard as she snapped. They had to stop it. This wasn't the young lord anymore. She admitted she didn't know what it was, but vowed they couldn't let it move freely while it puppeted Warren's body. Dukong roared that their inner chi was gone. How could they possibly stop such a monstrous force? Mobyong snapped back, fury blazing, asking if he was really going to just stand there and watch the young lord be devoured before either of them could move. Namwook jabbed a finger forward and shouted, "Warren's moving!" All eyes snapped to the figure advancing on the bloodied Guang, slumped against a tree. Warren glided with a chilling, unnatural calm, his eyes cold and utterly void of feeling. He hurled himself forward, soared a streak of lightning, driving straight for Guang's heart. Deep inside the mine, Warren plunged through blood-red water as a freezing darkness closed in to swallow him whole. He peeled his eyes open and the attendant's familiar face met his, a faint smile curling on their lips. "Yanhua!" He gasped, disbelief tearing through him. The instant her name slipped from his lips, warmth surged back into his veins. Consciousness slammed back into him. He shot awake as Mobyong's desperate voice reverberated in his ears. "Young lord, wake up, young Warren!" The shout yanked him awake to find the twin rising ghost blades and Mobyong propping him up, muscles straining as they fought to keep him steady. Mobyong roared, slamming his warning into him. "Don't let that power consume you. Overcome it." "You said it yourself. You swore to shield your family and forge the Tianzhong clan into the greatest sect of all?" Warren's breath evened as he forced out a ghost voice. "Master Mo, my acupressure points." And Master Mo caught it in a heartbeat. Mobyong drove his fingertips into a series of points along his body with surgical precision. The violent cheese unraveled, its menace thinning inch by inch until it dissolved into the air like smoke on the wind. Warren's eyelids fluttered closed as consciousness tore away, his thoughts clawing for one last gasp before his mind plunged into darkness. A hollow, ancient voice slithered up from inside him, cold as frost, whispering, "Next time it won't end so easily." Silence slammed the room. Then Dukong let out a long, relieved exhale and barked, "We're lucky the young lord came too." Kneeling beside Warren, Mobyong warned that if she'd struck the pressure points while he was still mired in deviation, his chi would have erupted and obliterated him. Dukong clicked his tongue and confessed that when Hwoarang tried to kill Jukwang, he nearly snapped. "Jukwang might be insane," he said. "The Songchun clan remained loyal to the Orthodox faction. If word of Jukwang's death reached them, it would unleash brutal retribution." Dukang spun toward Jiuquang and froze. Mobyong already stood over the wounded man, and Jungwook called out, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Namwook hissed the single word "antidote," and Jungwook blinked, replying, "Oh." Mobyong strode up to Jiuquang, face shadowed. gripping her sword until her knuckles went white, and hissed in an ice-cold, hollow voice. "Even now, your first instinct is to hunt for an antidote?" Steel sliced the air with a scream, and Zhu Guang folded and hit the ground, lifeless. The twin ghost blades shot skyward, then froze mid-ascent, nailed by sudden shock. Duke Gung erupted, disbelief scorching his voice as he roared, "What are you doing?" She slid her sword into its sheath with surgical calm and answered, her voice hard as forged steel. Zhu Guang had launched repeated attempts on the young lord's life, and worse. He'd seen Huaran's uncanny chi with his own eyes. Let him live and whisper it, and he'd ignite disaster for every one of them. She slung Huaran over her shoulder, strode away and hissed under her breath, "Nobody else needs to get their hands dirty. I'll handle it." Dukung tracked her fading silhouette and murmured. The young lord changed, and so did she. Crossing his arms, he hissed under his breath that maybe they'd all done it. Clicking his tongue, he spun to Namwook and barked for him to sprint off and find the antidote. Namwook was already tilting a tiny vial to his lips, and Jungwook exploded, roaring, "How can you be sure that's not poison?" Namwook smirked and explained that inhaling an antidote's scent jolts you with a dizzy, parched rush as the poison inside lashes out in self-defense. Poisons reeked so vile they made you gag and retch. Once he grasped that difference, he said, pinpointing the antidote became simple. Jungwook gave a slow nod, respect flickering in his eyes, and Namwook brandished a pouch, a sly grin twisting on his lips. He blurted, "Alongside the antidote I found something else. It looks insanely expensive." Groggy, Warren clawed his way back to consciousness and flung his eyes open to find himself lying in a bed at an inn. He shot upright, whispering that he was back at the inn. He folded into a perfect lotus and sent his chi spiraling through his body. A few heartbeats later, his eyes shot wide in stunned disbelief. He replayed Zhu Guang's attack in his head, stunned as a savage, uncontrollable power detonated inside him. He slammed his arm over his eyes as danger whooshed past. He'd just barely escaped disaster. His chi detonated out of control, almost shredding his body to dust. He snapped upright again and muttered, "If I could lose myself, even die." If he didn't seize mastery of the Taiji Depth Heaven tome, everything he'd bled and fought for would crumble to dust. A jolt seared through him. This power burning inside wasn't ordinary chi. Maybe it was the soul of an old man, ancient, tired, and sharp. And if that's true, the presence inside him knew far more than anyone suspected. Elsewhere in the inn, Moby Young stood beside the twin rising ghost blades. They huddled around the table in hushed tones, and just then Warren stepped into the room. Relief flooding him, Jungwook rushed forward and urgently asked how he felt. Warren brushed it off, told him he was fine, then snapped his gaze to Namwook, who clutched a small golden token, and barked, "What's that?" Namwook shot back, "Oh, this? Jokwang had it. It looked valuable, so I snatched it." Recognition exploded across Warren's face as he stared at the token. He breathed, "Cho Wu He's golden token. The proof that lets you meet the most beautiful woman in Hainan." Then he blurted aloud, "How could Jiok possibly have it?" A soft, knowing chuckle escaped him as he said, "Haha, I see." Warren gave a dry cough and muttered that the air had suddenly snapped tight with awkwardness. Moby Young snapped into a grave tone, called out, "Young lord," and was abruptly cut off before she could continue. Hua Ren cut her off, dipped his head and, voice raw with apology, begged forgiveness from her and the twin rising ghost blades, claiming the poison had choked off his inner chi completely, that Ji Ok Wang had already snapped, and that he had only wanted to protect them. So in that desperate moment he had no other choice. Moby Young shot to his feet, dropped into a deep reverent bow and thanked him. She snapped that if he hadn't stepped in they'd all be dead, and she demanded they know the truth. They froze for a heartbeat, then relented and began to explain. Before any of that he slammed down a question. "What happened to Zhou Guang?" Moby Young cut him off cold and said flatly, "He disappeared." Huaran's voice snapped with alarm as he barked that if Zhu Guang told the Song Chen clan what had happened, it would unleash disaster on them all. Moby Young cut him off again, assuring him it wouldn't happen. She said Ji Ok Wang had once forcibly ripped out his inner chi while possessed. Control had been ripped from him. By now he was a gibbering fool, reduced to nothing but incoherent babble. She locked eyes with Namwook and Jungwook and pressed for their agreement. Both answered with tight, reluctant nods. Warren finally relaxed, tension draining from his shoulders, and declared he'd believe Master Mo if she claimed it. He braced to tell them he had something to explain, but before another word left his lips, a man stormed up to their table out of nowhere. The man stepped forward, declared himself the inn's owner, forced out an apology, and said he had no choice but to ask them to leave. Jungwook snapped to his feet, indignation blazing as he demanded why the innkeeper was ordering his guests out without warning. The owner shot a look at the door and declared that the Sky Ocean Merchant Union had rented out the entire building. Warren's eyes slammed onto the name and he hissed it under his breath, disbelief like ice cutting his throat. Ripping a distant memory loose, he breathed the words, Sky Ocean Merchant Union, in a soft whisper. Wait, this is the exact place I became a son-in-law in my previous life. The Sky Ocean Merchant Union commanded Hainan's trade, a titan among the island's most prosperous and influential merchant houses. Under its sprawling banner, the Sky Ocean Escort Agency, the Sky Ocean Inn, and the Sky Ocean House thrummed like heartbeats. 3 powerhouse ventures that pumped wealth and prestige into its name. For Warren, his grip on this union cut deeper than wealth. In his previous life, he'd been its master, and the way that life ended was burned into him. She'd clawed at him, trying to drag him into the dark fold of that strange, twisted faction. His thoughts splintered as the innkeeper's uneasy voice sliced the silence once again, demanding they leave the premises. Warren steadied his breath and snapped into focus. If the Sky Ocean Merchant Union really pulled the strings on this order, the innkeeper's trembling fear suddenly made perfect sense. He gave the innkeeper a crisp bow and declared, voice steady and fierce, that he respected the request but would not submit to the Sky Ocean Merchant Union's demands as a paying guest. At his side, Yongwak closed in and hissed into his ear, warning that the Sky Ocean Merchant Union was no foe the Tianjiang clan could afford to underestimate. They commanded staggering wealth and lethal martial might. Before Warren could even answer, the inn's doors burst open and a man stormed in. Recognition hit Warren like a blow. His features snapped into a cold mask. That bastard, he fumed. To see that arrogant face here of all places. He swept his gaze around, voice dripping with contempt, and snapped at Warren. You don't know who I am? Where did you come from? Warren's voice cut through the air, calm and sharp. I'm young Warren of Hainan's Tianjiang clan. The man's eyes pinched into slits as he sized Warren up from head to toe. After a beat, a man scoffed he'd heard the Tianjiang clan's young master was too frail to ever leave his home. Hua Ren met his gaze calmly and shot back. Do I look sickly to you now? Silence slammed down as his arrogance wavered for a heartbeat. Then he stepped forward and closed the gap. His shadow crashed down on Warren as he loomed, voice firm and tinged with condescension. They said the Sky Ocean Merchant Union's men staggered, drained and ragged from a long journey. He ached to rest in peace. He insisted Warren, a fellow martial artist from Hainan, would understand the hardship they'd borne. Warren's lips curled into a sly grin as he shot back. That sounded a lot like a threat to my ears. And the man's composure snapped. He bellowed, What did you just say? Warren's smirk twisted as he thrust a finger toward the ceiling and snapped, If an orthodox sect uses its strength to force its will on others, how is that any different from the demonic or unorthodox factions? Crimson flooded his face as he ground his teeth and bellowed, You insolent wretch! Warren threw his head back and laughed, his voice ricocheting through the inn. The Sky Ocean Merchant Union's power hits like a tidal wave. A mere merchant union martial artist actually had the audacity to shout down the young lord of a martial sect. Those words launched Mo Byung and the twin rising ghost blades to their feet, hands snapping to their weapons' hilts. Warren's hand shot to his sword hilt, his left hand clenching the grip as he spoke, his voice a blade of ice. If you truly mean to rent out the entire inn. He wrapped the sheath of his sword with his right hand as he finished. Then how about we settle this by the laws of the Yanghu? Rage ignited in his eyes as he gripped his sword and roared, Fine, I'm outside! They squared off in the courtyard, and Mo Byung, standing behind Warren, shouted, panic cracking his voice. Are you really going to fight? Warren snapped, voice like iron. If he backed down now, the world would brand the Tianjiang clan weak. Letting a lone martial artist from the Sky Ocean Merchant Union bully him and stroll off unchallenged would make everyone think the clan was weaker than a merchant organization. He thundered that the instant their names rang out together, the confrontation became inevitable. It couldn't be dodged, and it shouldn't be. Warren's steady voice cut through the room. The loser stays silent. His eyes snapped wide in disbelief. He darted aside and muttered under his breath, and launched a blistering barrage of thrusts, each one snapping faster than the last. Warren watched him like a hawk, slipping past every strike with balletic precision as he tore apart the man's technique and the sword's rhythm. He thought, why does it move so slow? He snapped a blistering descent so fast his opponent didn't even have time to react. Warren's blade fell like a guillotine, halting a hair's breadth from the man's throat. Nearby, members of the Sky Ocean Merchant Union clustered, whispering in stunned disbelief, one of them hissing that no matter how fiercely their companion lunged, his blade couldn't even graze the young lord. Another scoffed, eyes flashing. Those aren't the movements of a sick man. The first agreed with a hard nod, declaring the rumor that the Tianzhang heir was too frail to move a lie. Warren's blade hovered at the man's throat when a commanding female voice sliced across the courtyard. "Stop right there!" And the man clenched his jaw, lifting his head slowly as he stared down at the sword resting against his neck. The moment the gilded carriage door swung open, the crowd crashed into deep, reverent bows. She glided into the room, graceful and magnetic, and every head snapped to her as the room fell silent. She closed in, eyes like knives, taking in the tableau, Huarin standing tall as her subordinate knelt at her side. Warren's eyes snapped open, shock ripping through him the moment recognition slammed into his gut. It hit him like a thunderclap. Hua Wunqiang, the daughter of the Sky Ocean Merchant Union's master. She raised a delicate fan to her face, voice icy and poised as she declared, "I am Hua Wunqiang," then dropped. "I did not expect to find a hidden dragon within the Tianzhang clan." Hua Rin averted his gaze, steadied himself, and replied evenly, "I am Yang Hua Rin." Hua Wunqiang sized him up in a heartbeat, curiosity flashing in her eyes. She stepped in close, eyes bright, and asked, "Come eat with me today. What do you say?" Warren gasped as a tidal wave of memories slammed into him. Arguments erupted, and bitterness once seared their relationship. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as politeness laced his wavering voice, and he forced out, "I appreciate the invitation, but I have matters that require my attention. I must decline. I hope you understand." She pressed the fan flat against her face, and the silence that followed stretched taut and unbearable. With a sharp flick, she snapped the fan shut, a thin blade of irritation cutting her voice as she said, "It was a pleasure meeting you, Lord Yonghua Ren." She spun with effortless grace and shot me a grin. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other a lot." She slipped away with her entourage. Warren let out a quiet breath as he watched the Sky Ocean Merchant Union group vanish down the road. Mo Byung strode up, admiration burning in his eyes, declaring he'd stunned her again. He'd toppled a skilled martial artist with effortless ease and even refused the Sky Ocean Merchant Union's daughter's invitation. Namwok and Jungwok couldn't stop grinning. Jungwok sighed, voice soft with longing, murmuring that if a woman like that had offered wine, it had to be exquisite. Huarin brushed off their barbs and headed back to the inn, snapping, "Let's just eat something light and get out fast." His voice ice cold as he warned that getting involved with her would only end badly. Later, the group huddled inside the inn, sinking into their seats and tearing into their meal. Mo Byung zeroed in on the tremor in his voice and gently probed if he felt ill, saying he'd looked unsettled ever since meeting Lady Hua Wunqiang, and Huarin forced a shaky laugh, stammering that he was fine. He saw the fix, clear his head with a little meditation and some sword training. Mo Byung shot to her feet and volunteered to come with him, but Huarin dismissed her with a single wave and insisted he'd go alone. He carved through the quiet streets beneath dusk's fading light. Memories of his former life with Hua Wenqiang exploded into his head, yanking his mind straight back into the past. Memories slammed into him. Her waiting for him at street corners, eyes alight with affection. Their laughter and fights, the warmth and the sting, and the times she stared at him with love and hate tangled in her gaze. Damn it, it's buried in the past. It's over, Horin. He fought to shake the memories loose, but a sudden commotion ripped his focus to the nearby chaos. Shouts ripped into his ears. He breathed, "A fight," and strode straight toward the noise. Recognition slammed into him. His eyes snapped wide. One of the fighters was someone he knew. "Gochuk!" Gochiok planted himself in the middle of the street, knuckles white on the chain leash as a rabid black dog snarled and snapped at his side. Far ahead, a man stood with his sword drawn, poised to fight. Huarin crouched in the shadowed corner of a nearby building, watching the confrontation as his eyes narrowed into knives and disbelief flared. How had Gochiok made it all the way here? He snapped his gaze to the beast at his side, sensing a strange aura radiating off its body. Gochiok's voice crashed like thunder, authority ripping the air as he bellowed at the man standing before him. "Surrender that thing now and we walk away in silence. Keep denying it to the bitter end, and you'll die right here." The man opposite him exploded, roaring, "How could you hand over something that didn't even exist?" Crouching down, Gochiok raked his hand over the black dog's skull with an unnerving calm and said, "This dog can smell prey from 50 kilometers away. It's a black wolf. That it came to you proves you have that thing." Hunched in the shadows, Huarin froze as the truth slammed into him. That black dog had trailed the demonic poison stone flower's scent all the way here. He plunged his hand into his pocket and snatched out the very flower, scowling. "The flower's with me, so why are they targeting that young man instead?" he hissed meanwhile. Gochiok's patience snapped. Teeth bared, he locked his gaze on the defiant man and growled, "Do I really have to kill you to find it?" he bellowed, forcing every ear nearby to catch his announcement. Listen up. I'm Gochiok, the young sect leader of Hubei's Serpent Dragon sect. Help me capture that man and my sect will reward you handsomely. Gochi-oke closed in slowly, menace pouring from every measured step. The young man stood unmoved, resolve burning in his eyes. He roared back, defiance scorching his voice. When you meet the king of hell in the underworld, tell him you were killed by Zhang Seok. The name jolted Hwaran. His eyes snapped wide as he thought. Zhang Seok, I've heard that name before. Ragged and road-worn, he still stands with the quiet dignity of a lord. This man's clearly from a reputable clan. Hwaran hadn't even finished his thought when Zhang Seok sprang forward, his blade slicing the air with lethal precision. Blades screamed and steel crashed as chaos devoured the street. Jung Seok surged with lightning agility and crushing force, tearing through opponents one by one. Lurking behind them, Gochiak ground his teeth and hissed, "Useless fools." Jung Seok lunged forward, driving a savage strike at another attacker beside Gochiok. He skewered his subordinate from behind. The blade ripped through the man's body and slammed into Zhang Seok as well. Zhang Seok lurched backward, blood gushing from his wound as he unleashed a ragged shout. You plunged your blade into your own subordinate. An act so depraved even the demonic cult wouldn't dare sink this low. Gochi-oke shrugged, voice like ice, and snapped that we stand between the orthodox and the unorthodox factions. Rage boiled in Zhang Seok's veins, his face darkening as he ground his teeth and blood dripped from his mouth. Qi detonated from his body in a blinding wave, and from the corner he bellowed, "You people have crossed the line!" Hwaran's eyes snapped wide, shock blasted through him as Zhang Seok's overwhelming energy ripped through the air. It hit him. That Qi. My God, how did I not recognize his name right away? He tore through his memories, dragging up everything he knew about the man. Zhang Sayuk, hailed as a hero among demons, is the sole surviving disciple of the fallen hidden saint cult leader, who was obliterated by the three demonic heavens. Zhang Seok wielded the demonic arts, but a chivalrous heart burned in him, and he carved his title from honor and raw strength. Years later, his power erupted, enough to stand toe-to-toe with Haichul Ryong himself and contest the title of the strongest under the heavens. Clinging to the wooden wall at his side, Hwaran ripped a plank apart in his fist, knuckles whitening as thoughts raced through him. A man like him lay dead on foreign soil because I stole something. Gochi-oke erupted with a savage roar and lunged at Zhang Seok, his sword flashing in the dim light as he bellowed, "Die!" Before he could reach his target, a massive chunk of wood rocketed straight at him. Gochiok snatched his sword up at the last heartbeat, blocking it by inches as sparks exploded and the impact hurled him stumbling backward. His eyes snapped to the sound. He barked, "Who's there?" And Warren emerged from the shadows. His hand rested on the sword, voice calm as cold steel. He cut through the silence. "Stop right there," he snapped. "If you're just a passerby, move along, quietly." But then, recognition crashed into him and his voice snapped up. "You're the one who took down Dogye Gong today, aren't you? Step aside. This isn't your fight." Warren's voice stayed iron calm as he dropped the words. "It does concern me, Warrior Young." "Do the nobles really spill each other's blood?" he sneered. The gathered crowd erupted into a low, hungry murmur, and a lone onlooker jabbed a finger and leaned in to whisper. "Isn't that the young master of the Tianzhang clan? The very one who clashed with Doge Gong earlier?" Another onlooker snapped a quick nod. "He's back in the fight!" The first shook his head, voice blunt. "No, I've been watching from the start. Gochiak was about to kill that vagabond, and not a single soul dared step in." Jungwook and Namwook barreled onto the scene, bulldozing through the crowd. Jungwook raked a hand through his hair and rasped, "Is that the young lord? At it again. He's starting to fit that sword demon title." Namwook smirked and shot back. "Better than standing around doing nothing." And Jungwook blinked, confused. Most people clamped their mouths shut, trembling at the serpent dragon's sexual past and the shadow its influence cast. Amid the chaos, Jang Suk locked eyes with Hwaran and snapped, "I appreciate your concern, but don't bear this humiliation for me. I pull whoever I can to safety and blaze the path I chose. Don't waste your worry on me." Before Jung Seok could even reply, Go Cheok exploded in fury, lunging forward and screaming, "You brats!" Steel screamed as their blades slammed together, a thunderous crash ripping through the square. Two torrents of chi slammed together, spitting sparks as the crowd gasped and the battle exploded into chaos again. Warren stayed ice cold, each motion measured and razor-sharp. Gochi-oke staggered, his timing splintering as he tried to match his opponent's relentless rhythm. He ground his teeth and hissed under his breath, "This bastard! How is he this strong?" Warren's chi erupted into a blinding blaze, cloaking him like a living flame as he surged forward, one deliberate step at a time. Gochiok's bravado shattered. He roared, "Damn it!" as his men bolted in blind panic. "You'll regret this, boy. If you're hauling that thing, we'll catch up soon and ambush you from behind." Seok snarled, "You coward, running away!" His eyes narrowed as he glared at the fleeing figure. "We have to kill that black dog," he thought, razor sharp. "If it catches the scent of the demonic poison stone flower again, it'll drag them straight back to us." He crushed the hilt, chi spiraling around him as his gaze pinned the fleeing beast. One fluid motion and his blade screamed forward. At the last heartbeat, the black wolf snapped aside, barely evading the blow. Warren wasn't finished. His eyes slit to razor points as he funneled every scrap of focus and breathed the name of his technique. The soaring dragon emperor tore the air apart and unleashed his flying sword technique in an instant. The sword flipped in midair, reversed course, and rocketed skyward in a blinding streak. A razor-sharp whistle ripped through the air, then it hurtled back down toward the target. Warren released a long, slow breath and dropped his hand. "Woof," he murmured. Their voices ricocheted through the square as Yonghua Rin stood statue still in its center. He stared down at his hands, still trembling, disbelief roaring in his chest as he thought that after hundreds of relentless drills, the flying sword technique finally struck true. He had, for the first time, mastered it. His fist snapped shut in quiet satisfaction. He forced his breath to steady, only a few paces away. Recognition slammed into him. Huarin's swordplay was the hidden St. Colt's flying sword technique, unmistakable. How could the Tianzhong clan's young master possibly know a martial art from a sect long vanished? Around them, the crowd erupted into excited murmurs, and someone shouted that the sword sweep was a dragon ripping into the sky. Another roared that a swordsman whose blade danced like a dragon and who swore by the code of chivalry deserved a name forged for legends. A voice roared, "Call him the Flying Dragon Sword Hero!" The crowd erupted, claiming the title as their own and roaring a single thunderous chant. He mouthed the words under his breath. "Flying Dragon Sword Hero," chuckled low, then murmured, "At last, even I have a nickname." He hadn't even had time to savor the moment when a chilling presence crept up behind him. An icy hand clamped his shoulder, and a familiar voice, calm and razor-sharp, asked, "Are you pleased with your new title?" Warren stopped dead, cold sweat streaking his brow. He spun and found Mo beyond there, sighing in exasperation. She'd only glanced away for a second, and he'd already plunged headfirst into another fight. Warren's voice cracked as he fumbled that it wasn't what it looked like. Mo Beiyang brushed off the excuses and laid it out. The Songchun clan, tied to the Orthodox faction, can't use force freely, while the Serpent Dragon sect answers to no rules and can strike whenever it pleases. She froze, pinned him with a searching stare. Then her eyes softened. She declared, eyes wide with disbelief, that Warren had crushed Gochiok and walked away without a single scratch. She erupted with praise for his jaw-dropping improvement, and as his master she brimmed with genuine pride. Before Warren could answer, a guttural groan ripped through the silence, shattering their moment. Strength abandoned them and they crumpled to the ground, unable to last another second. Later that night, Jung Se-yok jolted awake in a dimly lit room, dazed and scrambling to find his bearings. He shot upright, saw his wounds already bandaged, and Warren hovered nearby, asking, "You awake?" Jung Se-yok gaped at his bandaged body, disbelief flashing in his eyes, then choked out a trembling "thank you." Warren didn't just save him, he dragged him out of danger and personally patched up his wounds. He proclaimed Yonghua Rin a true hero, voice cracking as he confessed he had no idea how to ever repay such kindness. A faint smile curled on Warren's lips as he offered, "If Se-yok wishes to repay me, seal a contract during that period." He'd become Warren's living shield, guarding him at every turn, and he'd get paid fairly for it. He choked out disbelief, generosity crashing over him. Warren snapped that a swordsman as skilled as Sayoke walks the road for reasons only he knows. A rare, lethal illness clawed at her, and the only medicine that could pull her back from the brink carried a staggering price tag. Tears flooded his eyes as realization struck. This money would finally let her begin to heal. Choked sobs shook him while he kept thanking Warren over and over. Warren thrust the pouch into his palm and ordered him to bring his sister to stay with them. They'd be in town for a while. Silence smothered the room. After a while, only Sayoke's quiet crying sliced through the stillness. Jung Se-ok flashed a sharp wave outside the inn, then bolted off to fetch his sister. The instant he vanished, Mo Biang spun to Hua Rin with a skeptical glare and snapped that he'd been far too generous, just for a mere bodyguard. She leaned forward, eyes sharp, and demanded, "Is there a specific reason you're being this kind?" Jung Wook, standing beside her, cleared his throat and agreed. quipping that with that much money you could easily buy several bottles of the finest wine. He declared Jang Sayoke a man fated for greatness and smirked that snapping up his friendship for a few silver niang was a steal. He admired how Sayok had stood like an unyielding pillar, defiant as the serpent dragon sect tightened its circle around her. Hwarin's laugh exploded as they shot back that they weren't going back yet. They were bound straight for Jungjo. His words detonated into instant protest. Mobian howled in disbelief, demanding why they were suddenly bound for Jungjo, and Jungwook erupted, stunned, crying out if they were truly not going home. Hwarin darted ahead as they exploded into a sprint, racing to catch up. Mobyong snapped that they'd already secured the elixir and visited the Jiggle clan, so there was no reason to head anywhere else. Quarren froze for a heartbeat, dodging the question as a storm raged behind his eyes. He feared his chai ripping loose again and devouring his body, so he crushed it with iron will. He had to wrest the Taiji Depth Heaven tome into submission, and only one person could make it happen. Trapped in Jungjo, he had no choice but to bolt out immediately. He planted himself in the inn's doorway, cleared his throat, and bellowed that this was the young lord's command. Mobyong thundered a protest, insisting the clan lord would surely be worried. He snapped that a messenger pigeon had already been sent, nothing to worry about. They'd depart the next morning. Jungwook slammed his palm to his forehead in exasperation. Namwook shrugged, utterly helpless, and Mobyong clenched her fists, muttering that no one could ever predict what Hwarin was thinking. He plunged into a deep bow before Hwarin and declared his preparations complete. He jabbed a finger at the girl beside him and proclaimed, "This is my younger sister, Jong Munye." Munye dipped into a deep, graceful bow, her voice thick with gratitude as she thanked Hwarin for helping her brother. Hwarin matched the gesture with a crisp, respectful nod, announced himself as young Hwarin of the Tianzong clan, then swept his companions into view and introduced each of them. He declared the twin rising ghost blades were his personal bodyguards and clan warriors. The twins snapped upright, squared their shoulders, and wore icy, showy stares to impress Munye. Hwarin flashed a sly grin and jabbed that they'd sooner stand guard over wine than protect a single person. Namwook snapped instantly, accusing Hwarin of casting them as villains, while Mobyong hovered at the edge, utterly silent. Quarren jabbed a claw at the waiting carriage and declared he'd already readied it to spare them the slog ahead. Young-seok gaped, then blurted, "Is that carriage meant for my sister?" Once Munye was tucked inside, Hwarin spun to Namwook and thrust the reins into his hands, asking him to take control. Namwook snorted, snapping back that he wasn't the only one who could seize the wheel. He brandished a bottle of golden wine and declared whoever served as coachman for the day would receive a cup. The moment the two swordsmen laid eyes on the gleaming bottle, they both gasped. Namwook howled in disbelief and Jungwook echoed him, crying out that precious drink, and in the next instant, they drowned each other out as Jungwook insisted he'd drive the carriage and Namwook bellowed that Hwarin had chosen him. They immediately erupted into a furious argument, heads colliding as each lunged to claim the role. Inside the carriage, Jung Moon-ye clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a soft laugh as Hwarin and Jung Se-yuk snickered beside her. From the side, Moby-young eyed them with a sharp scowl, folding her arms as a barely concealed disdain etched across her face. Young Horin, Jung Se-ok, and Jung Moon-hye huddled together inside the carriage. Mid-ride, Jung Se-yuk snapped his head toward Horin. He swallowed hard, forced a polite smile, and asked if he might finally pose the question that had tormented him for years. He had to know right then if the martial art Horin unleashed against Gochek was a secret technique of his clan. Jung Moon-hye snapped at her brother, reminding him it was rude to ask someone point-blank about their martial arts, and Jung Se-ok, spotting his mistake, immediately blurted out an apology. Across from them, Horin eyed the siblings, a faint secret smile flickering behind his eyes. He'd ripped his technique into the open, so Jung Se-ok's curiosity flared. As a direct disciple of the Hidden Saint cult, and with the Tianzhang clan's swordsmanship born from that same cult, Jung spotted it instantly. Horin shattered the silence, proclaiming it a secret clan technique, and revealing that his ancestor had once learned it long ago from a legendary martial master. Jung Se-ok dropped into a respectful bow, voice ringing with awe as he said the technique had seared itself into him, then admitted he'd been aching to try it firsthand, and pleaded that his words not be taken as rude. Warren cracked a grin and tossed out a challenge, a friendly spar after dinner that night. He added, pointing to Jung Se-ok's fight with Gochek. He'd held back in the fight. Now every fiber of him screamed to unleash his true power. Jung Se-ok exploded into hearty laughter and answered with a quick, eager yes. Later that evening, the sun plunged beneath the horizon and night rushed in. They skidded to a stop in the open field and plunged straight into duel preparations. No hesitation. They lunged at the same instant, blades slamming together in a furious, relentless chorus of sparks. Gasping for breath, Warren forced out a long, weary exhale and urged them to call it a night. Young Seok slid his sword home, and in the hush dissected the duel. Just as he'd expected, Warren's blade moved with elegant, refined precision. The form wasn't identical to the Hidden Saint cult's, but its foundation was unmistakable. Certainty slammed into him. Horan's soaring Dragon Emperor sword was a twisted, modified version of their cult's demonic Dragon Emperor sword. Yet, he couldn't fathom how the original's once overwhelming power had been gutted the moment it merged with another cultivation technique. He strode back to the carriage, thoughts coiling in the hush, while Warren lingered behind, eyes fixed on his receding silhouette. A sly smirk curled his lips. If luck favored him, he'd soon seize one of Jang Seok's chi cultivation methods. Young Seok and his sister slipped a few paces aside, dropping into hushed whispers. Munya demanded to know how his spar with Horan had gone. Young Seok snapped that he was now certain the Tianjin clan was tied to the Hidden Saint cult. Moon-hee froze, asked if he really believed it, and Seok just nodded. When Horan's sword technique fused with another form of cultivation, its cutting edge dulled and its power drained away. She'd always known the cult's martial arts radiated deadly power. Moon-hee pinned him with a knowing look. She pieced it together. He was weighing whether to hand Horin their chi cultivation technique. Young Seok swallowed pride and conceded Horin had already done far more for them. He laid a steady, gentle hand on his sister's shoulder and reminded her that Horin's care healed her. She sprang to her feet and walked freely again. Moon-hee exploded with a bold declaration, vowing to personally pass the Hidden Saint cult's secret chi cultivation technique to Horin, and Young Seok, stunned, blurted, "Are you really serious?" Monya's nod struck like a gavel as she snapped that her brother must never link Horin to their Hidden Saint cult. It lay long dead, and trying to revive it through Horin would defy the will of the heavens. He stood alone in a sea of flowers, the cool wind slashing across his face as he drank it in. She stepped forward with a soft greeting and a casual, "You just out for a walk?" Hua-rin spun to face her, grin blazing, and shot back warmly. "What brings you here?" Moonhye's gaze dropped as she admitted she'd been racked with worry, unsure how to repay the immense kindness he'd shown her and her brother. He brushed it off as nothing, just doing what was right. Moonhye shook her head and snapped that when someone receives a favor, they must give one back. She declared she'd pass down her clan's chi cultivation technique to him, insisting her brother was convinced his martial arts would roar to new heights under its guidance. Horin cleared his throat, calm and measured, insisting he couldn't accept such a monumental gift for so tiny a favor. Then Moonhye suddenly raised her voice. She warned that if they didn't act, peace would forever evade her and her brother. Warren froze, cheeks flaming scarlet as he fumbled to meet her eyes, stammering. He jabbed at their joined hands and blurted, "You're still holding my hand." Realization slammed into Moonhye. Her cheeks flamed crimson and she snapped her grip, letting him go. She whirled away, burying her face in a burning blush. Warren froze for a heartbeat, eyes locked on his hand before he spoke again. Silence stretched, then he finally exhaled and nodded. If this was truly her wish, he'd accept it gladly. Moby Jung had been tracking them from a distance, silent as a shadow. A foreign tightness seized her chest. She clamped a hand over it and whispered to herself, bewildered. Youngwook, Namwook, and Young Seok sat shoulder to shoulder, howling with laughter and tossing back drinks as grins lit their faces. I slipped away peacefully as they eventually forged on with their journey. Outside, a boy swept the dusty ground. Warren strode over, cutting the quiet with a single question. Where could he find the man called the Omniscient One? His eyes ignited with excitement as he snapped that he absolutely knew the man. But if Warren had come looking, he was already too late. Warren's face hardened into shadow as he snapped. "What do you mean?" The boy said nothing at first, only whistling a short tune while Warren flung a silver coin. The boy snatched it eagerly and dropped his voice into a low, urgent whisper. The boy explained that rumors had ripped through the town, claiming the Omniscient One had been captured by the Sangwon clan and was slated for execution the next day. Horin jolted back, yelled in disbelief, and demanded, "Explain yourself!" The boy blurted that the Omniscient One had read the Sangwon clan's young lady's fortune. She followed it, snapped, and threw herself into the river. Furious and grief-stricken, the Sangwon clan pinned her death on him, seized him, and vowed to behead him at dawn upon hearing this. Warren's jaw snapped shut, his face darkening, and he ground his teeth as he grimly realized the situation had just become far more complicated than he'd expected. Stepping away from the inn, Horen's mind snapped to the Omniscient One, Nan Myung-wok, hailed as a fortune-teller and exorcist. but in truth the last envoy of the eradicated Bay cult. The Bay cult, masters of soul sorcery, lay shattered long before the three demonic, three orthodox era rose. A jolt hit Warren. If it was him, he could rip the old man living inside him right out. His mind snapped shut the moment he realized Nan Myung-wok was set to be beheaded the next day. Mo Byung leaned in, voice low and urgent, and asked if the young lord wanted him to read his fortunes. Hua Ren fell silent, his attention snapping to the distant streets. Mo Byung called after him again, loudly addressing him as young Master Yong. Hua Ren's gaze snapped to a familiar figure striding toward them, and he bellowed, "Lady Jaigal!" Jaegal Yohei drew closer, leaned forward, locked eyes with Hua Ren and teased, "Am I really so unwelcome that you're this stunned?" Hua Ren and Mo Byung dropped into a deep bow before her. Hua Ren snapped, "Of course not," then admitted he hadn't known she was in Zhengzhou. He let out a low, triumphant chuckle and sneered, "She didn't even realize I was here." She spun to the woman at her side and declared, "This is young Hua Ren of the Tianzhang clan." She breathed her name like a secret, Sangwan Yusul. Her name hit him like a thunderclap. Hua Ren muttered under his breath, "The song has won the clan." Hua Ren snapped at Yohei, "Are you here on business in Zhengzhou?" And Yohei shot back that she'd rushed over because Sungwon Mijung, the woman who'd treated her like a friend, had fallen ill. The omniscient one, entrusted by his clan with a priceless burden, had come charging to retrieve it. Off to the side, Mo Byung's confusion flared at Hua Ren's reply, and he leaned over his shoulder to hiss, "What are you up to now?" Yusul's voice dropped to a shy stammer as he asked about the omniscient one, then, biting his lip, confessed he was in her clan's estate right now. Hua Ren, cool as ice, let out a low chuckle and said, "I get it. Wait a bit, and he'll be here soon." Yusul choked out that he couldn't come, explaining he'd committed a terrible crime against her clan and would be beheaded the next day. Hua Ren's eyes cut to slits, then he snapped and started lashing out. He slammed a hand to his forehead, fury crackling in his voice as he roared, "What? We'd endured sleepless nights to get to Jiangju because of him." He spun toward Yusul and snarled, "What a disaster!" Out of nowhere, he grabbed Yusul's hand and whispered, his voice silk-soft and overflowing with romance, "Lady Sungwon, forgive me. Is there truly no other way out of this?" Nearby, both Mo Byung and Jaegal Yohei froze, shock slamming into them at what he'd just done. Cheeks flaming and breath ragged, panic clawing at her throat. She answered without looking at Warren, stammering, Then, just meet him today. I'll go straight to father. We have to go right now. You took my hand, and now you're marrying me this instant." Her words landed, and Warren fell silent for a heartbeat before leaning in, closing the distance between them. A brilliant grin lit his face as he burst out, "Thank you so much for your help, Lady Sungwon." After Warren's dramatic stunt, Yohei snapped, unloading a stream of complaints at Yusul and punctuating each one with a sharp flick to her forehead. Hua Ren strode up to Mo Byung and snapped for her to race back to the inn and tell their party they'd stop at the Songwon clan first, then ordered Master Mo to wait at the inn. Mo Byung shot a sharp side-eye and snapped, "Understood." She scoffed, spun on her heel and marched straight to the back. After some time, Hua Ren, Yohei, and Yusul reached the Sungwon clan estate, and Hua Ren roared, "This is the Sungwon estate!" They reached the entrance and Yusul exploded forward, bolting off while shouting she'd run to tell her father first. Horin craned his neck as the Seongwon clan's colossal palace towered overhead, fully twice the size of the Tianzong clan's. He swore the Tianzhang would rise and one day eclipse it. His train of thought slammed to a stop when Jaegal Yohei's voice sliced through the air. "Young Master Young, you're plotting something else, aren't you?" Hwarin snapped his gaze to her, and she grinned at him, arms folded across her chest. Yohei scoffed that he wasn't the type to fawn over a woman he'd just met. There had to be another scheme at work. Warren clicked his tongue, a flash of respect in his eyes as he thought to himself she was one razor-sharp kid. He cleared his throat, spoke up with cold clarity, and made her suspicion undeniable. Grinning, Yohei jabbed a finger and said it was likely tied to the Seongwon clan's omniscient one, offering to spin a prophecy. The Seongwon clan won't let you meet their omniscient one. Yohei explained that by holding the Jaegal clan's Vice Pavilion Master title, she became a living ear for the Jianghu, catching every whispered grievance and secret complaint that drifted through its shadows. She dropped the bomb. Sungwon and the Tianjung clan share a tangled past, Hwarin at the center, and she reckoned it all boiled down to an old bitter grudge. Hwarin snapped, insisting she'd never mention it without reason. She must know another way. Yohei's face went stone cold as he slammed a deal onto the table. Hwarin pounced, calling her out and bluntly asking what she wanted. Yohei barked a laugh at his threadbare merchant air and nodded. She'd come for a favor. She closed in on Warren and declared, "Soon." A handful of next-generation disciples were poised to descend on the Sangwon clan. While they stood there, she leaned in and asked him to pretend to be her lover. Warren froze, words caught in his throat. He locked eyes with Yohei, mind racing. Sungwon clan, next-generation disciples, Jaegal Yohei. Had the Sungwon clan already launched their plan? It was moving faster than he'd expected, way too soon. He yanked Yohei's hand and shouted, "I'll help you!" Yohei flashed a smile and replied, "Good, I'll tell you how you can move the Seongwon patriarch." Warren squared himself before the Sungwon patriarch and his wife, who sat towering atop their throne. He dropped into a low, respectful bow and declared, "I, young Warren of the Tianjin clan, pay my respects. It is an honor to meet you and your wife, Sungwon patriarch." Sungwon Bukin stood unshaken at the scene, while his wife, Ha Yang-gyu, flinched as surprise flashed across her face. The patriarch clicked his tongue, locked his gaze on Hwoarang, and spat out words dripping with disgust. He snapped his head to his wife, whose unease about the situation tightened her like a coiled spring. The patriarch leaned in, voice booming. He'd heard Hwoarang wanted to meet Nan Myung-wok. Keeping his head bowed, Hwoarang murmured he'd heard the man was at the Sungwon clan, and the patriarch answered with a cold, flat refusal. Hwoarang dropped into silence. Yohei had been right. The old wounds between the Seongwon and Tianjiang clans demanded settling, so following Yohei's method, he refused to strike the Seongwon patriarch directly. Their eyes locked, and he fixed a piercing stare on the patriarch's wife, Ha Yang-yu. Warren crashed to his knees and bellowed, "Please, hear me out!" Ha Yang-yu shot to her feet. Warren kept bellowing. "A ghost's inside me now," he breathed, his voice softening as he pressed a hand to his chest and said, "Sickness knocked me flat once. I'm pinning it down now, but it could erupt again. Ugh." He erupted into a violent coughing fit, howling, "Ah!" Ha Yang-yu, the patriarch's wife, snapped around to face her husband and bellowed, "My lady, Young's condition is critical. Rush him to the omniscient now," she barked. The patriarch fixed her with a grim stare and stammered, "My lady, this is my jurisdiction. This isn't something for you to get involved in." She lunged into his space and screamed, "Are you going to refuse even my request?" The patriarch reeled back, stammering, "No, it's because of that man and my former wife." She cut him off mid-sentence and unleashed a chilling shout. "Sangwon Byokin, are you taking your anger out on his son over past affairs?" The patriarch froze solid and his wife snapped, "You're supposed to be the patriarch of a reputable clan." She unleashed a brutal barrage of blows at him. The patriarch finally boomed, "All right, I permit it. Quell your anger." He roared, "Chief Yu, take young Master Young to see Nan Young-gwok immediately." He spun toward his wife with near-sacred reverence while she still glared at him, her gaze searing with anger. Chief Yu flanked Hwoarang as they stormed down into the prison cells. As they descended the stairs, Hwoarang's mind exploded with one frantic question. What had happened between the Sungwon patriarch and his father? At last they reached the cell. Chief Yu's voice sliced the silence. "He's here." He pivoted to the prison cell and thundered at the omniscient one. "Nan Myung-wok, a guest has come to see you." Nan Myung-gwok lay shackled hand and foot inside the prison cell. He hauled his head up, eyes hollow, and croaked, "I'm going to die tomorrow. Who's here for me?" His head snapped up. He caught sight of Warren and his whole body quaked. He jabbed a finger at Hwoarang, terror lacing his voice as he blurted, "What? Who are you?" Hwoarang locked his gaze on Chief Yu. Yu only shrugged, leaving the situation to hang heavy in the air. Nan Myung-wok roared, "Who on earth are you, turning up with that thing embedded in your body?" He swept his gaze over Warren, toe to head, and recoiled at the oppressive tsunami of demonic energy choking the air. The evil spirit towered over Warren, its black aura wrapping him in a suffocating shroud. Myung-wok bellowed, demanding to know why Warren had tracked him down. Warren froze before the cell, locked eyes with Myung-wok, and his voice sliced through the silence. He insisted a ghost had latched onto him and pleaded to speak with it, so Myung-wok had to help him. Myung-wok snapped, "Nonsense!" the instant he heard it, but Warren crashed over his words and silenced him before he could finish. He roared as the omniscient one, Nan Myung-wok, then stepped right up to the cell and dropped his voice to a razor whisper, saying he knew Myung-wok was an emissary of the Bei cult, so rousing a soul and talking to it would be possible for him. Myung-wok's eyes snapped razor sharp. In a voice cold as ice, he declared Warren no ordinary brat. He hissed that Warren harbored something unbelievable inside him, yet he was still alive. And he even knew Myung-wok's true identity. They locked eyes in a heavy silence. Then Myung-wok cut through it, his voice slicing the air as he spoke again. A shadowy voice demanded whether Warren truly sought a conversation with a soul, then bargained he'd help, only if Warren helped him in return. Warren snapped. I understand you, Myungwak, but it's impossible. The Sangwon patriarch already made his decision. And he added that tomorrow, Myungwak would. Myungwak cut him off, shouting that if Warren helped him, he'd survive. He swore that if Warren was the key, awakening Sangwon Mi-jong could snatch him back from the jaws of death. Myungwak ripped into a blow-by-blow account of his predicament, laying out every detail, and after a while, Warren repeated what he'd pieced together. While learning the split-body sword art, Sangwon Mi-jong's mind tore in two, and she collapsed. Her persona fractured, and the Sangwon clan shut Myungwak away to silence talk that their martial arts were dangerous. Myungwak confirmed it, and announced it came through the soul inside Warren. They could obliterate Mi-jong's other persona. If she awakened, his chains would snap and he'd be free too. He struck a bargain. Warren could speak to the soul trapped inside him. And he warned the thing living in Warren wasn't an ordinary man, so only he could reach it. No one else could help. Warren's voice tightened as he took in the gravity of the situation and breathed. 3 lives. Sangwon, the Mi-jongs, the Myungwaks, and his own pinned everything on this plan, then. He flashed a brilliant grin and agreed to the deal. Myungwak's face lit up with satisfied triumph. He barked, good, then snapped that before anything else they'd have to sway the Sangwon patriarch, a task he called the hardest of all. Warren turned to leave, glanced back at Myungwak with that same confident grin and promised he'd handle the patriarch. Confusion pinned Myungwak to the spot as Warren turned and strode away. Warren dove in and laid out the whole situation to the patriarch and his wife. In a heartbeat, Myungwak was freed from prison and staggered into the open, utterly bewildered. He lunged toward Warren, disbelief crackling in his voice as he demanded how Warren had managed to persuade that stubborn old fool. Warren stayed silent. Myungwak gripped his hand, rattled it, and demanded his name again. Warren shot back, "Young Warren of the Tiancheng clan." Patriarch Sangwon Byokin unleashed a raw, booming cough that slammed the room into silence and snapped everyone's attention to him. He stormed up to them and warned flatly he'd only granted their request because his wife had asked him to. One slip, and Warren wouldn't just be ruined. The whole Tianzong clan would be forced to answer for it. The patriarch and his wife stormed off in fury, but Ha Yanggyo spun back for a piercing look at Warren, and that glance ignited a silent iron vow in him. They burst through the door and stopped cold. Sangwon Mi-jung lay motionless on a mattress in the center of the room, a blanket pulled over her. As they stepped inside, Myungwak whipped a knife out of his pocket. The blood sprang to life, writhing and whipping itself into a ritual circle in the center of the room. He barked for Warren to step into the circle and sink down cross-legged. Once Warren did it, Myungwak's hand descended and planted itself on Warren's head. He vowed to pry open Warren's upper chi core and rouse the sleeping soul inside, then force that soul into Sangwon Mi-jong's upper chi core to erase her other persona. Myungwak warned Warren he didn't have a big role. The enchantment will snuff the soul's power, but the soul might still claw at him with whispers. If it speaks, Warren must ignore it. Myungwak unleashed the spell and roared, "Let us begin!" The room erupted in a violent tremor as pressure surged, the air squeezing inward like a tightening vice. Moments later, Myungwak's shout ripped through the air. "Something's wrong!" The soul's power smashed past everything he'd expected, and he snarled at young Master Young, "Never let the soul beat you!" Pain ripped through Warren as he fought the crushing force. Darkness swallowed him, and when his eyes snapped open, he stood in a wide, open palace soaked in demonic energy, bathed under the hellish crimson glow of a fiery red moon. A lone figure perched on a distant throne. The instant Warren's eyes locked on him, recognition slammed into him. He frowned, then tore into words. "You are—" Before Warren could finish, the man on the throne cut him off in a chilling voice. "Young Warren, to think you'd try to use me," he spat, crushing the armrest and rising to reveal the very same old demon who had possessed Warren in his past life, snarling that Warren had gravely underestimated him. Warren planted himself on the raised platform, his mind racing in a private storm. A thunderbolt of recognition struck him. He finally knew who this being truly was. The demonic master thrust a finger at him instantly. Warren slammed to his knees, the impact fracturing the stone beneath him. He snarled in frustration. His body flat out refused to obey him. The demonic master descended the stairs, every measured step summoning condensed demonic chi that coalesced and crackled beneath his feet. He hovered weightless, suspended in midair, then looked down at Warren. He planted himself in front of Warren, who remained on his knees, and pressed on, reliving how weak and pathetic Warren had been. How he'd burst in, crying and shouting, "Why are you fighting here?" His entire household lay slaughtered. The demonic master stopped dead. He groped for the name of the old woman who'd raised him, and after a tense beat, he shot out, "Yanhua, wasn't it?" The moment someone breathed Yanhua's name, Warren's features snapped into a grim, steel-edged mask. The demonic master sneered, proclaiming she'd never learned martial arts, that her body was fragile as glass, and that she was painfully ugly. Warren heaved himself to his feet, stood squarely face to face with the demonic master, and snapped, "Shut up!" He pinned him with an icy glare and thundered, "How dare you speak to me that way?" Warren clamped onto the demonic master's wrist and, voice like iron, vowed he would kill him. The demonic master erupted into laughter, first a low, sinister chuckle. A thunderous roar tore through the air, then an uproarious cackle exploded, echoing off every wall. His voice snapped cold. He closed the distance until his breath grazed Warren's face and taunted, "You really believe I'm capable of that?" He loosened his grip on Warren's neck and vowed he'd wait for that day. Not yet. The time wasn't right. He planted a hand on Warren's shoulder, grinning as he promised he'd be watching him. And within moments, the world around them cracked and splintered like glass. It erupted into a storm of fragments. As the realm folded in on itself, the demonic master's voice thundered through the void, echoing, "I'll be watching you, young Warren."